Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Patricia Blackwood, but everyone calls me Patty. I've been a park ranger for 12 years now, working deep in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. Most folks think being a ranger means I just walk around looking at trees all day, but I actually have a PhD in botany. I study plants, especially the old healing herbs that grow wild in these mountains. I got into this work because of my daughter Emma. She's only 8 and she has diabetes. The doctors do what they can, but watching your little girl struggle with needles and medicine every day, it breaks your heart. That's why I study the old plant remedies. Maybe somewhere in these hills, there's something natural that could help her. The summer of 1987 was different from the start. We had a bad drought that year. Ponds dried up, streams ran low, and places that had been underwater for decades suddenly appeared. That's how I first heard about the cabin. 2 hikers came to the ranger station in July, all excited about something they'd found. They were college kids from Pittsburgh, and they kept talking over each other. "There's this garden," the girl said, "but it's not normal. The plants are huge. And green," her boyfriend added, "like really green, even with the drought." I get reports like this sometimes. People find old homesteads in the woods and think it's mysterious. Usually it's just some forgotten farm where the soil is still good. "Where exactly did you see this?" I asked. They showed me on the map. It was way back in the Cranberry Glades area, miles from any trail. That got my attention. The glades are mostly bogland, not good for growing much of anything. "You should check it out," the girl said. "There's something weird about that place." I told them I'd look into it, but honestly I figured it was nothing. I had real work to do, checking trail conditions, monitoring the wildlife. But the drought kept getting worse, and I found myself with some extra time. So, on a hot Thursday morning in late July, I packed my gear and headed out to find this mysterious garden. It took me 3 hours of hiking through thick forest to reach the area they'd described. The trees here were old, massive oaks and maples that made the forest floor dark even at midday. I could smell something different in the air. Sweet, but not flower sweet. More like herbs drying in the sun. That's when I saw it. In a small clearing stood the ruins of an old cabin. The roof had mostly fallen in, and vines covered the walls. But behind it, impossible as it seemed, was the most beautiful garden I'd ever seen. The vegetables were huge, tomatoes bigger than softballs, corn stalks 8 feet tall. And the herbs, I could identify maybe half of them. Wild ginseng, bloodroot, black cohosh, plants that were rare and valuable. But they were growing like weeds, thick and healthy despite the terrible drought. I walked closer, pulling out my notebook. The soil should have been dry and cracked, but it was dark and rich. When I knelt down to touch it, it was perfectly moist. That's when I noticed the root cellar. Behind the cabin, built into a small hill, was an old stone root cellar. The heavy wooden door hung open and cool air drifted out. Most root cellars I'd seen were full of old canning jars and rotted vegetables, but this one looked maintained. I shined my flashlight inside. Bundles of herbs hung from the ceiling, perfectly dried. Glass jars, lined wooden shelves, filled with seeds and powders. In the far corner sat a wooden table covered with tools, all clean, all recently used. Someone was still coming here. I backed out of the cellar quickly and looked around the clearing. No footprints except my own. No tire tracks on the old logging road. But someone had been caring for the pterosaurs, his garden. The plants didn't grow this well on their own, especially not in a drought. I started taking pictures and collecting samples. Some of the herbs I'd never seen before, or if I had, they didn't look like this. Everything was too perfect, too healthy. It was like someone had created ideal growing conditions in the middle of a forest. As I worked, I kept glancing at the root cellar. Something about it bothered me. Maybe it was the way the cool air kept flowing out, even though the day was getting hotter. Or maybe it was the smell. Not just herbs, but something else. something that reminded me of hospitals. I was bent over a patch of strange flowering plants when I heard it, a soft sound, like someone humming an old song. I froze, listening. The sound came from inside the root cellar. My first thought was that I should leave. I was alone, miles from help, and someone was in there. But my scientific mind kicked in. This could be the person who was tending the garden. Maybe they could tell me about these amazing plants. "Hello?" I called out. "I'm a park ranger. I'd like to talk to you." The humming stopped. I waited, but nobody came out. After a few minutes, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. The forest can play tricks on you sometimes. Wind through the trees can sound like voices. I finished collecting my samples and headed back. But all the way home, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me from inside that root cellar. That night, I started researching the history of the area. In the county records, I found mention of a homestead owned by Sarah Wyndham. The dates showed she lived there from 1923 to 1941, when she simply disappeared. According to the old papers, people used to come from all over the county to see Granny Wyndham when they were sick. She was what folks called a root doctor, someone who used wild plants to heal people. The old newspaper clippings talked about miraculous cures, desperate families traveling for days to reach her cabin. But there were other stories, too. Whispered rumors about people who went to see Sarah Wyndham and never came home. I went back to the cabin 3 days later with better equipment, camera, soil testing kit, plant press for proper samples. I told myself this was just research, but really I couldn't stop thinking about that garden. Some of those plants could be worth studying, maybe even worth money if they had medicinal properties. And if I'm being honest, I kept thinking about Emma. Her blood sugar had been terrible lately, despite all the medicine. What if something in that garden could help her? The morning was cooler, with thick fog hanging between the trees. It made the forest feel different, quieter, more mysterious. When I reached the clearing, the garden looked even more impressive than before. I set up my equipment and started working systematically, documenting each plant species. Some I recognized, traditional Appalachian medicine plants like golden seal and wild ginger, but others were completely new to me. They looked like variations of common herbs, but bigger, more potent somehow. I was photographing a patch of unusual mushrooms when I heard footsteps. Someone was walking around the cabin, moving slowly and deliberately. The steps were soft, like bare feet on earth. I grabbed my camera and quietly moved toward the sound. An old woman was working in the garden. She was maybe 70, with long gray hair braided down her back. Her dress looked like something from the 1940s. Simple cotton, faded blue. She was pulling weeds with her bare hands, humming the same tune I'd heard before. "Excuse me," I called softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up and smiled. Her face was deeply lined, but kind, and her eyes were the brightest green I'd ever seen. "Well, hello there," she said in a thick mountain accent. "I was wondering when you'd come back. You saw me before?" "Oh yes, I see everyone who comes here." She stood up, slowly, brushing dirt from her hands. "You're the plant lady, aren't you? The one with the sick little girl?" My blood went cold. I'd never mentioned Emma to anyone connected with this place. "How do you know about my daughter?" "Word travels in these hills," she said, but her smile didn't reach those green eyes. "Diabetes, isn't it? Terrible thing for a child to suffer." I stepped back instinctively. "Who are you?" "Folks call me Sarah. Sarah Wyndham." She gestured to the garden around us. "This is my place. Has been for a long time." That was impossible. The records showed Sarah Wyndham had disappeared in 1941. This woman would have to be over 100 years old. "The county records say Sarah Wyndham lived here in the 1920s and 30s, I said carefully. "Do they now?" She laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "Well, records aren't always right, are they? Time moves different in these mountains." She walked closer to me, and I noticed she left no footprints in the soft earth. "Your little girl," Sarah said. "Emma, isn't it? 8 years old, type 1 diabetes. Diagnosed when she was 5. The doctors say there's no cure." I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. How could you possibly know that? I know lots of things. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small glass vial filled with green liquid. I know this would cure her. Completely. Forever. The vial seemed to glow in the morning light. Despite my fear, I felt drawn to it. How many nights had I lain awake worrying about Emma's future? How many times had I watched her cry when the needle hurt? What is it? I whispered. Plant medicine. Real plant medicine. Not the watered-down stuff they make in laboratories. Sarah held it out to me. 1 dose, and your daughter will never need insulin again. I stared at the vial. It looked like concentrated life itself, swirling with its own inner light. What do you want for it? Sarah's smile grew wider. Just a small favor. There's a man coming tomorrow, hiking alone, looking for rare plants. He has a sickness too, cancer, though he doesn't know. You IT yet? I'll cure him, but I'll need help with the preparation. What kind of help? Nothing difficult. Just hold him still while I work. Sometimes the healing process can be intense. Something in her voice made my skin crawl. But I thought about Emma, about her pale face that morning when her blood sugar crashed, about the fear in her eyes every time I had to give her a shot. I need to think about it, I said. Of course you do. Sarah tucked the vial back into her pocket. But don't think too long. Your daughter's condition is getting worse, isn't it? I can see it in your face. The worry, the sleepless nights. She was right. Emma had been getting sicker despite all the medicine. Last week she'd passed out at school. The doctors were talking about stronger treatments, more invasive procedures. Come back tomorrow at sunset, Sarah said, if you want to help your child. I wanted to ask more questions, but when I looked up, she was gone. Simply vanished, like morning mist. I searched the entire clearing, calling her name. I even went into the root cellar, but it was empty except for the herbs and jars. No sign that anyone lived there. But on the wooden table, I found something that made my hands shake. A small piece of paper with Emma's name written on it in careful handwriting. Below her name was a list of her medical information. Blood type, medication dosages, her doctor's name. Information that wasn't in any public record. I ran back to my truck and drove home as fast as the mountain roads would allow. But I couldn't escape the image of that green liquid, or the promise it held. That night, Emma had another episode. Her blood sugar spiked so high I had to take her to the emergency room in Charleston. We sat in the bright hospital waiting room for hours while they got her stable. Mama, she whispered, lying on the hospital bed with an IV in her small. Alarm. Will I always be sick? I held her hand and lied. The doctors are going to make you better, baby. But I knew they couldn't. They could manage her condition, but never cure it. She would face a lifetime of needles, restrictions, and constant fear. Unless... I thought about Sarah Wyndham and her impossible garden. About medicine made from plants that shouldn't exist. About a woman who knew things she couldn't possibly know. And I thought about tomorrow at sunset. I didn't sleep that night. I kept going back and forth. Was Sarah Wyndham real, or was I losing my mind? The rational part of me, the scientist, said it was impossible. People don't live for 50 years without aging. Gardens don't thrive in drought conditions without water. And strangers don't know intimate details about your family. But the mother in me kept thinking about that green liquid. What if it really could cure Emma? By morning, I'd made my decision. I would go back to the cabin, but I wouldn't go unprepared. I packed my service pistol, a radio, and enough supplies for several days. If Sarah Wyndham was dangerous, I'd be ready. The hike back seemed shorter this time, like the forest was pulling me toward the clearing. When I arrived, the garden looked different. The plants had grown since yesterday, noticeably grown. Vines that had been small were now thick as my arm. Flowers had bloomed and gone to seed. It was like watching time-lapse photography. Sarah was waiting for me by the root cellar. She wore the same faded dress, but now I noticed details I'd missed before. The fabric wasn't just old, it was rotting, and her skin, which had seemed wrinkled yesterday, now looked almost transparent. "You came back," she said, clapping her hands together. "I knew you would. A mother's love is the strongest force in the world." "I want to see proof first," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Prove that your medicine works." Sarah laughed. "Oh, it works. Would you like to see?" She led me to a patch of the garden I hadn't noticed before. Wooden crosses marked small mounds of earth, a makeshift cemetery hidden among the herbs. "Robert Jenkins," she said, pointing to the first cross, "came here in 1963 with lung cancer. I cured him completely." "Then why is he buried here?" "The healing requires balance," Sarah explained, running her fingers over the wooden marker. "Life from life, death from death. Robert was cured, but someone had to pay the price." My stomach turned. Someone else died so he could live? Not died. Gave their life force. Their years. There's a difference. She moved to the next cross. "Margaret Foster, 1975. Barren woman who wanted children. I gave her fertility, and she had 6 beautiful babies." "And this person?" "Gave their youth so Margaret could conceive. They aged quickly but peacefully. And Margaret's children are all healthy and strong." The cemetery had dozens of crosses, decades of balanced healing, as Sarah called it. People cured of terrible diseases in exchange for the life force of others. "I won't help you murder someone," I said. "Murder?" Sarah looked genuinely surprised. "Child, I'm a healer. I don't take life. I transfer it. The man coming today is already dying. Cancer in his lungs spread to his liver. He has maybe 6 months left. You said he doesn't know. He suspects. That's why he's out here alone looking for miracle cures in the forest. I can give him 20 more years of healthy life." "In exchange for what?" Sarah smiled and pulled out the green vial again. "In exchange for the life force of someone who's already lived their time. Someone old and sick themselves. There's no one else here. Isn't there?" Sarah's green eyes seemed to glow. "What about you, Patricia? You're 35 years old, healthy, strong. You could give 10 years of your life to save a dying man and still have plenty left. And in return," she held out the vial. Up close, I could see it pulsing with its own heartbeat. "Your daughter would be completely cured. No more insulin, no more blood tests, no more midnight trips to the emergency room. She could live a normal, healthy life." I stared at the medicine. 10 years of my life for Emma's future. It seemed like a bargain. "How would it work?" "Simple. The man will arrive soon. I can feel him on the mountain already. When he comes, you help me restrain him while I perform the healing. The process can be unsettling. People sometimes fight it, even when it's helping them. And then? Then I draw the life force from you. Not all at once. That would be crude. I take 10 years gradually, over the course of an hour. You'll age, but slowly. Your hair will gray a bit, your face will line. But you'll be alive, healthy, and your daughter will be free." It sounded reasonable, logical even. What mother wouldn't trade 10 years of her life for her child's health? "He's coming," Sarah said suddenly. I heard it too. Footsteps on the trail getting closer. A man's voice talking to himself as he hiked. "Remember," Sarah whispered, "he's dying anyway. We're giving him a gift." A middle-aged man emerged from the forest, carrying a heavy backpack and looking exhausted. He was thin, with the gray complexion of someone fighting illness. When he saw the garden, his eyes went wide. "My God," he breathed. "This is incredible." Sarah stepped forward, every inch the helpful mountain woman. "Well, hello there, stranger. You look tired. Come sit a spell." "I'm Dr. Richard Hartley," the man said. "I'm researching medicinal plants. This garden, it's impossible. How are you growing these specimens?" "Oh, I have my ways," Sarah said sweetly. "You look poorly, Dr. Hartley. Are you feeling all right?" The man's hand went instinctively to his chest. "Just some breathing problems, nothing serious." Sarah and I exchanged glances. She'd been right. He was sick and looking for a cure. I might be able to help with that, Sarah said. I know a thing or two about healing. She led him toward the root cellar, talking about her plants and thastos, ear properties. I followed, my hand on my pistol. This was it, the moment of choice. But as we walked, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. Dr. Hartley was leaving footprints in the soft earth. Sarah wasn't. Inside the root cellar, Sarah lit several oil lamps that filled the space with flickering light. The stone walls were covered with more herbs than I'd noticed before, thousands of bundles hanging from wooden pegs. The air smelled of dried plants and something else, something sweet and sick. Now then, Sarah said to Dr. Hartley, let me have a look at you. She had him sit on a wooden stool while she examined him. Her hands moved over his chest and back, not quite touching but somehow sensing what was wrong inside. Oh my, she said sadly. You're sicker than you know, aren't you? Dr. Hartley's face went pale. What do you mean? Lung cancer. Started small, but it's spreading. I'd say you have 6 months, maybe 8 if you're lucky. The man slumped forward. How can you tell? I have a gift, Sarah said simply. But more importantly, I can fix it. She moved to her shelves and began mixing ingredients in a clay bowl. Dried leaves, powdered roots, liquid from several glass bottles. As she worked, she hummed that same tune I'd heard before. The healing process is intense, she told Dr. Hartley. You'll need to stay very still while the medicine works. Patricia here is going to help make sure you don't hurt yourself. That was my cue. I was supposed to help hold him down while Sarah did whatever she was planning, but I'd had time to think while we walked to the root cellar. Time to notice things that didn't add up. Sarah, I said carefully, how long did you say you've been living here? Oh, a long time, she replied, not looking up from her mixing. The county records show Sarah Wyndham disappeared in 1941. That's 46 years ago. Records speak out and be wrong. And you look maybe 70 years old. If you've been here since the 1920s, you'd have to be over 100. Sarah stopped mixing and looked at me. Those green eyes weren't kind anymore. Mathematics was never my strong suit, she said coldly. Dr. Hartley looked confused. What's going on here? I pulled out my pistol. I think we should leave. Now. Sarah laughed, and the sound echoed strangely off the stone walls. Oh, Patricia, you almost had me convinced you were smart. The temperature in the root cellar dropped 20 degrees in an instant. The oil lamps flickered, and shadows danced on the walls like living things. You see, Dr. Hartley, Sarah continued, her voice changing, becoming deeper and more menacing. Patricia is right. I have been here since the 1920s. But I wasn't 70 then, and I'm not 70 now. Her appearance began to shift. The gray hair turned black, the wrinkles smoothed away, and her faded dress became rich and new. But her eyes remained the same bright, unnatural green. I was 23 when I made my bargain, she said. Young, desperate, dying of consumption. A traveling woman offered me a deal. My life for the power to heal others. I thought she meant she'd cure my tuberculosis. The root cellar felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in. But that wasn't the bargain at all. She wanted my life, my mortality. In exchange, I would live forever, sustained by the life force of those I claimed to heal. Dr. Hartley tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. Some force was holding him in place. Every person I've cured over the decades has paid with their life, Sarah continued. I drain them slowly, taking their years to sustain my own youth. The healing is real. I do cure their diseases, but they die anyway, aged to death in a matter of hours. I aimed my pistol at her, but my hands were shaking. Let him go! Why would I do that? I'm so hungry, Patricia. It's been months since my last patient, and I can feel myself getting older. I need his life force. And what about Emma? What the cure you promised? Sarah's smile was terrible. There is no cure for your daughter. That vial contains nothing but water and food coloring. But you would have helped me kill Dr. Hartley for it, wouldn't you? A mother's desperation makes her do terrible things. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. I'd been ready to help murder an innocent man for a fake cure. "You're a monster," I whispered. "I'm a survivor," Sarah corrected. "And now I think I'll take both of you. Dr. Hartley's cancer-ridden life force won't last me long, but you're young and healthy. Between the two of you, I should be good for another year or two." She raised her hands, and I felt something pulling at me from inside, like invisible hooks were attached to my heart, trying to drag something vital out of my chest. Dr. Hartley gasped and clutched his chest. Color was draining from his face as Sarah began her terrible feeding. I had seconds to act. I thought about my botany training, about all the plants I'd studied in these mountains. Some were healing herbs, but others were deadly poisons. And I'd noticed something while examining Sarah's garden. Among all those miraculous healing plants were several species of nightshade. I lunged toward the shelves, knocking over oil lamps and sending glass jars crashing to the floor. Behind me, Sarah shrieked in anger. "You can't stop this," she screamed. "I won't go back to being mortal." My hands found what I was looking for, a jar of ground nightshade root, one of the most potent poisons in North America. I ripped off the lid and flung the powder at Sarah's face. She inhaled it instinctively and stumbled backward, coughing. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her skin began to wrinkle and sag. "What did you do to me?" she gasped. "Poison," I said, "but not the kind that kills. The kind that breaks magical bonds." I was guessing, but it seemed to work. Sarah was aging rapidly, her stolen years finally catching up with her. The young woman became middle-aged, then elderly, then ancient. "No!" she screamed, reaching for Dr. Hartley. Again. "I need life. I won't die." But her power was broken. Instead of draining his life force, she was losing her own. Decades of stolen time were flowing out of her like water from a broken dam. Dr. Hartley collapsed, but he was breathing normally. The color was returning to his face. Sarah fell to her knees, now looking like the 100-year-old woman she really was. "You've killed me," she whispered. "No," I said, helping Dr. Hartley to his feet. "I've just made you mortal again." Sarah aged another 30 years in as many seconds, then crumbled to dust. The root cellar began to collapse as whatever power had maintained it finally failed. I grabbed Dr. Hartley and dragged him outside just as the stone walls caved in. Dr. Hartley and I made it back to civilization, though he was weak and confused about what had happened. I told the authorities he'd been exposed to toxic plants and suffered hallucinations. They believed me. I was a park ranger and a botanist. Who would doubt my expertise? But I knew the truth. And when Dr. Hartley had tests done a few weeks later, the doctors found something impossible. His lung cancer was completely gone. Not in remission, gone entirely, as if it had never existed. Sarah's final act of healing magic, perhaps. Or maybe the shock of nearly dying had triggered some natural immune response. I prefer to think it was the latter. The garden withered and died within days of Sarah's death. When I returned to collect evidence, I found only normal forest plants growing in poor soil. The root cellar was completely collapsed, filled with ordinary dirt and rocks. But I kept some of the plant samples I'd collected on my first visit. Analysis showed they contained unique compounds that had never been documented. I've spent the last several months working with pharmaceutical researchers to understand their properties. We may have lost the Magica, our garden, but we saved the science. 3 of Sarah's hybrid plants show promising results for diabetes treatment. Not miracle cures, real medicine that works through chemistry, not supernatural power. It won't help Emma immediately, but it gives me hope for her future. As for Emma herself, she's doing better. Not cured. There was never a real cure to begin with. But I've connected with better doctors, found new treatment options, and most importantly, I've learned to focus on giving her the best life possible, rather than desperately seeking impossible solutions. Some nights, I still dream about that green vial and its false promise. I think about how close I came to helping a monster commit murder, all for the love of my child. It's a sobering reminder that desperation can make good people do terrible things. The Forest Service officially closed the area around Sarah's cabin, citing unstable soil conditions and toxic plant contamination. But sometimes hikers still report finding unusual gardens deep in the woods, places where plants grow too well, where the soil is too rich, where the air smells of herbs and something sweeter. I always follow up on these reports personally. Most turn out to be nothing, just people's imaginations running wild in the deep forest. But not all of them. Last month I found another abandoned cabin with another impossible garden. This one tended by a man who claimed to cure arthritis and heart disease. A man who knew things about his patients that he shouldn't know, and who asked for small favors in return for his miraculous treatments. The mountains are full of desperate people seeking cures, and where there's desperation, there are always predators ready to take advantage. But now I know what to look for. And I know that sometimes the real cure for impossible problems isn't magic at all. It's just refusing to believe that the impossible is necessary. My name is Margaret Stone, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm telling you this story because I need someone to know what really happened up on Old Rag Mountain in the summer of 1971. The official reports say it was bear attacks. They're lying. I was 31 then, and I'd been a park ranger for 9 years. I was the first woman to work this district at Shenandoah National Park, and I had to prove myself every single day. Before this job, I taught elementary school, which is probably why they stuck me with the family camping programs and safety talks. I didn't mind. I loved working with kids. Maybe I loved it too much. 3 years before that summer, I lost a baby. Miscarriage at 6 months. After that, I threw myself into my work, especially anything involving children. My husband said I was too protective of other people's kids, but he didn't understand. Every child in my park was my responsibility. That August was perfect weather. Families came from all over to camp in the backcountry. The Old Rag Mountain area was especially popular. 15 miles from the main road, steep trails, beautiful views. It was wild country, the kind of place where you could still pretend civilization didn't exist. The area had history. During the Great Depression, there was a civilian conservation corps camp tucked back in those woods. Young men came to build trails and plant trees. The old barracks were still there, mostly fallen down and covered with vines. Sometimes hikers would find rusty tools or old bottles. The local people had stories about that place. They said children went missing during the hard times of the 1930s. Families were desperate, couldn't feed everyone. Some kids just disappeared. The old-timers claimed those children were still out there, raised by mountain spirits. I thought it was nonsense. Wild children were just stories. People can't survive alone in the woods, especially not kids. I was wrong about that. It started with the drought. We hadn't had rain in 6 weeks. The streams were running low, which meant all the campers had to use the same few water sources. Families clustered together in areas they usually spread out across. More people meant more noise, more activity. Maybe that's what woke them up. The first thing I noticed was how quiet the animals got. In all my years in these mountains, I'd never heard them go so silent. Even the birds stopped singing. My partner, Paul Vincent, said I was imagining things, but I knew better. Animals know when something's wrong before we do. Then there were the tracks, small bare footprints in the mud around the camping areas. They looked like children's feet, but wrong somehow. The toes were spread too wide, like someone who'd never worn shoes. And they showed up in impossible places, on rock faces in trees, on ledges no normal person could reach. Paul laughed when I showed him. "Some kid's just a good climber," he said. But I'd worked with hundreds of children over the years. These weren't normal footprints. The last thing that should have warned me was the dogs. The search and rescue team used bloodhounds to find lost hikers. Those dogs would track anything, anywhere. But when we brought them to Old Rag Mountain that summer, they wouldn't go past a certain point on the trail. They'd whine and pull backward, hackles raised like they sensed a predator. I should have listened to the dogs. It happened on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of August. The Walsh family had been camping at White Oak Spring for 2 days, Mom, Dad, and 8-year-old Tommy. Nice people from Richmond. The dad was a lawyer, the mom taught piano. Tommy was one of those kids who asked a million questions and collected rocks in his pockets. I was doing my morning rounds when I heard the mother screaming, ran to their campsite and found them in pieces. The mom was crying so hard she couldn't talk. The dad kept saying, "He was right here," over and over. Tommy had been playing with his toy cars, beside their tent while his parents made breakfast. They turned around for maybe 2 minutes to deal with their camp stove, and when they looked back, he was gone. "Tommy," the mother called. "Tommy, this isn't funny." But it wasn't a game. I could feel it in my bones. We searched all day. I called in backup from 3 other districts. We had 30 people combing those woods, calling Tommy's name until our voices were raw. The state police sent a helicopter. We found nothing. Nothing except his sneakers. They were 20 feet up in an old oak tree tied to a branch by their laces. There was no way an 8-year-old boy could have climbed that high. The trunk was smooth bark with no handholds until 15 feet up. Even if Tommy could have climbed it, why would he take off his shoes and tie them to a branch? Paul had a theory. Maybe someone took the kid and left the shoes there to throw us off. But that didn't explain the other things we found. That night, while we were still searching, other campers reported hearing strange sounds. Childish laughter echoing through the trees, but not happy laughter. Wild laughter, like kids playing a game that would scare adults. The sounds seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Mrs. Chen, camping with her family near Limberlost Trail, said she saw children watching from the tree line around midnight. 3 or 4 of them, she told me. Dirty kids, maybe 7 or 8 years old, just standing there, staring at our tent. When I shined my flashlight on them, they were gone. Her husband thought she was dreaming, but Mrs. Chen wasn't the type to make things up. She was a nurse from D.C., practical and clear-headed. The next morning brought more weirdness. Campers woke up to find toys in the trees around their sites. A baby doll with matted hair hanging by its neck from a rope. Wooden figures carved from sticks, arranged in lash and little circles. And strangest of all, bone whistles. Hollow bird bones with holes drilled in them tied to branches with grass. "Kids are playing pranks," Paul said, but his voice didn't sound convinced anymore. I collected the toys and studied them. The wooden figures were carved with simple tools, maybe a sharp rock or piece of metal. The bone whistles were old, weathered by years of rain and sun. And the doll's hair wasn't just matted, it was full of leaves and twigs, like it had been buried in the forest floor. These weren't pranks. Someone had been making these toys for a long time. On the 3rd day, we got another call. The Miller family camping at Hannah Run. Their 6-year-old daughter Jenny had vanished during her afternoon nap. 1 minute she was sleeping in their tent, the next she was gone. No sounds, no struggle. Her parents were sitting 10 feet away the whole time. 2 missing kids in 3 days. I called the FBI. Special Agent Morrison arrived that evening with a team of child abduction specialists. He was a thin, serious man who treated me like I didn't know how to do my job. "Probably a drifter," he said, studying our maps. "Someone's camping illegally in these woods, watching families, looking for opportunities. We'll find him." But I knew it wasn't a drifter. Drifters don't leave toys in trees. They don't take children's shoes and tie them 20 feet off the ground. And they definitely don't make bone whistles. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those carved wooden figures, the way they were arranged in circles like some kind of ritual. And the laughter Mrs. Chen had heard, not the sound of one person, but multiple voices, like a group of children playing together in the middle of the night, in the deep woods where no children should be. Around 3 in the morning, I heard it myself. Faint laughter drifting through my cabin window, coming from the direction of Old Rag Mountain. It was too far away to be clear, but it sounded like kids having the time of their lives. Kids who should have been in bed, in houses with parents who loved them, not out there in the dark, wild woods, laughing at jokes only they understood. The 3rd child disappeared on Friday. Bobby Chen, 10 years old, taken from his family's campsite at Corbin Cabin while his parents were filtering water from the stream. By the time they got back to their tent, Bobby was gone. The only sign of him was his baseball cap, found a quarter-mile away, torn and hanging from a thorny bush. Agent Morrison's team had been searching for 4 days without finding anything useful. No fingerprints, no footprints they could use, no witnesses who could give clear descriptions. The agent was getting frustrated, and he was taking it out on me. "These mountains are your responsibility, Ranger Stone," he said. "If there's someone living illegally in this area, you should know about it." But I was starting to think it wasn't someone. It was multiple someones. That afternoon, I decided to check the old CCC barracks. I'd been putting it off because it was a long hike through rough country, and I didn't want to go alone. But with 3 children missing and the FBI breathing down my neck, I couldn't wait for backup. The trail to the old camp was overgrown and hard to follow. 40 years of rain and wind had almost erased it. I pushed through thick brush and climbed over fallen trees, following what was left of the path deeper into the mountains. The barracks sat in a clearing that was slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Most of the buildings had collapsed, their wooden walls rotted and covered with vines. But one structure was still partly standing, a long, low building that might have been a dormitory. I found evidence that someone had been living there recently. The floor was swept clean of leaves and debris. In one corner, I found a circle of stones that had been used as a fire pit, with fresh ashes still inside. Scatter. And around the room were makeshift tools, sharp rocks tied to sticks with grass rope, animal bones carved into needles and fishing hooks. And everywhere, I found toys like the ones we'd discovered in the trees. Wooden dolls, bone whistles, little animals carved from stone. They were arranged in groups around the room like children had been playing house. But the most disturbing thing was the drawings. Someone had drawn pictures on the walls using charcoal from the fire pit. They were crude, childlike drawings, but the subjects made my skin crawl. Stick figures of adults with X's for eyes, groups of small figures surrounding larger ones, and over, the same image, children holding hands in circles around what looked like bodies. I was studying the drawings when I heard footsteps outside. I froze, listening. Bare feet on the wooden porch, trying to move quietly but not quite managing it. Multiple sets of feet. Maybe 4 or 5 different people. Small people from the sound of it. Children. I drew my service pistol and moved to the window. Through the dirty glass, I could see shapes moving in the tree line. Small figures keeping to the shadows, watching the building where I was trapped. One of them stepped into the sunlight. It was a girl, maybe 12 years old, but wrong in ways I couldn't immediately name. Her hair was long and matted with leaves and mud. Her skin was brown from dirt and sun, and she was naked except for a skirt made of animal hide. But it was her posture that made my blood freeze. She moved like a wild animal. Her back was hunched, her arms hung long at her sides, and her head turned in quick, jerky motions like she was constantly checking for predators. When she walked, she didn't put her weight on her heels like normal people do. She walked on the balls of her feet, ready to run or fight at any second. And her eyes. Even from 30 feet away, I could see her eyes were different. Too wide, too alert. Like a deer's eyes, always watching for danger. She wasn't alone. Other shapes moved in the woods around her. Smaller children, maybe 6 or 7 years old, keeping low and staying hidden. I counted at least 4 others, but there could have been more. The girl raised her head and sniffed the air, like a dog. Then she looked directly at the window where I was hiding. She smiled. Her teeth were filed to points. I stumbled backward from the window and knocked over a pile of wooden toys. The crash echoed through the building like a gunshot. Outside, I heard rapid footsteps and strange calls. Not words, but sounds like birds might make to warn each other of danger. By the time I got back to the window, they were gone. I ran out of the building and searched the tree line, but found nothing except footprints in the soft earth. Small, bare feet with widely spread toes, just like the tracks we'd been finding around the campsites. I radioed Paul immediately. "I need backup at the old CCC camp," I said. "I found evidence of illegal habitation." Paul's voice crackled back through the radio. "Can't do it, Maggie. We got another situation. Family at White Oak Spring reported someone messing with their campsite last night. Food stolen, tent ropes cut. They're pretty shaken up." How many in the family? 3, 2 adults and a teenage daughter. My heart sank. Get them out of there, Paul. Right now. Don't let them stay another night. Already on it. But Maggie, there's something else. The other families are getting spooked. Half of them packed up and left this morning. Word's getting around that these mountains aren't safe for kids. He was right. We were losing control of the situation. Soon there would be news reports, maybe even TV crews. The Park Service would shut down the whole area, and whoever was taking children would disappear deeper into the mountains where we'd never find them, or find the children they'd already taken. I hiked back to the ranger station as fast as I could, my mind racing. The feral children, because that's what they had to be, were getting bolder. They'd been hiding for decades, maybe since the 1930s, living wild in the deepest parts of the mountains. Somehow they'd survived, and now they were hunting. But why were they taking modern children? What did they want? I was still asking myself that question when I got back to the station and found Paul's truck parked outside. But no sign of Paul himself. The front door was standing open, and there were muddy footprints on the floor. Small footprints, with widely spread toes. "Paul?" I called out. No answer. I followed the footprints through the building. They led to the back office where we kept our files and radio equipment. The radio was smashed, its components scattered across the floor. Our telephone line had been cut, and on the wall, drawn in what looked like mud but smelled like blood, was the same symbol I'd seen in the old barracks. A circle of small figures holding hands. Paul Vincent was gone. I found Paul's body the next morning. He was half a mile from the ranger station, in a clearing I'd walked through 100 times before. They'd hung him from a tree branch with his own rope, 20 feet off the ground. His uniform was shredded, and there were bite marks on his arms and legs, small bite marks, child-sized. But the worst part was his face. His eyes were gone, and his mouth was stuffed with leaves and flowers, like some kind of ritual offering. I stood there looking up at my partner's body, and I finally understood what I was dealing with. These weren't just wild children. They were predators. They'd been living in these mountains for 40 years, and they'd learned to hunt. I radioed for help on my backup radio, but got only static. The mountains were playing tricks with the signal, or maybe the wild children had found a way to jam it. Either way, I was alone with 3 missing Kais, Diaz and a pack of feral children who had just declared war. I had 2 choices: hike out and get help, which would take at least 6 hours, or try to find Tommy, Jenny, and Bobby myself before the wild children decided they were done playing games. I chose to stay. That afternoon, I went back to the CCC camp, but this time I came prepared. I brought flares, extra ammunition, a first aid kit, and 3 days' worth of food and water. If the wild children wanted to fight, I'd give them one. The camp was empty when I arrived, but I could feel eyes watching me from the woods. I searched the collapsed buildings systematically, looking for any sign of the missing children. In the ruins of what might have been a mess hall, I found something that made my heart race. Tommy Walsh's shirt, torn and bloody, hanging from a nail on the wall like a trophy. "I know you're out there," I called into the trees. "I know you have the children. I want to talk." Silence. Then from somewhere deep in the woods, I heard a voice. "Mother, not mother." The voice was female, young, but with an accent I couldn't place. It wasn't quite English, but it wasn't any foreign language I recognized either. The words were slurred and strange, like someone who'd learned to talk from listening to conversations from a distance. "Mother, not mother, comes to our place. Why?" I turned toward the voice but couldn't see anyone. "I want the children back. Tommy, Jenny, and Bobby. They don't belong here." Laughter erupted from multiple directions. Not happy laughter, but the sound of predators who'd just heard a good joke. "All children belong here," the voice said. "Mother, not mother, knows this. Mother, not mother, comes to be with children, yes?" "No," I said firmly. "I came to take them home to their families." More laughter, but darker this time, threatening. "No families," the voice said. "Families leave children in woods. Families forget children. We remember. We take care of children forever." A figure stepped out from behind a tree 30 feet away. It was the girl I'd seen before, the one with filed teeth and wild eyes. But now I could see her more clearly, and what I saw made my stomach turn. She was older than I'd thought, maybe 15 or 16, but malnutrition had stunted her growth. Her arms and legs were covered with scars, and her fingers ended in nails that had grown long and sharp like claws. She moved like a spider, quick and jerky, never taking her eyes off me. "You're the alpha," I said. "The leader." She tilted her head, considering the word. "Alpha, yes. I am first child. I teach others to hunt, to hide, to take what we need." "How long have you been out here?" "Always. Since the big people left us." She gestured toward the ruined buildings. "We were small then. Now we are strong." She'd been abandoned here as a child during the Depression. She'd survived, and she'd taught the others to survive. For 40 years, they'd been living wild, taking whatever they needed to stay alive, including children. "Where are Tommy, Jenny, and Bobby?" The girl smiled, showing her pointed teeth. "Safe. Learning. Soon they will be like us. Wild children. Free children. Let me see them. First, mother not mother must choose. Be with children, or be like the rope man." She gestured toward where Paul's body was hanging. "We need new mother. Old mother died last winter." My blood went cold. There had been others. Adults who'd stumbled into their territory, captured and forced to help raise the feral pack. Some had cooperated. Others had ended up like Paul. "If I agree to stay, you'll let the 3 children go back to their families." The girl laughed. "No families! Children stay. Mother not mother stays. All together. Forever." She was insane. 40 years of isolation and violence had broken whatever humanity she'd once possessed. There was no reasoning with her, no bargaining. The only way to save Tommy, Jenny, and Bobby was to fight. I pulled out my flare gun and fired it straight at her. The flare hit her in the chest and exploded in red fire. She screamed and fell backward, rolling on the ground to put out the flames. Other voices erupted from the woods, angry, frightened cries as the pack realized their leader was hurt. Small figures began emerging from the trees. 7 of them, ranging in age from maybe 6 to 14. They moved like a wolf pack, spreading out to surround me, their eyes fixed on their wounded alpha. I fired my second flare into the air, hoping someone might see it and send help. Then I drew my pistol. "Stay back," I shouted. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to." The alpha struggled to her feet, her chest and face burned but not critically injured. She pointed at me and made a sound like a bird call. The pack responded immediately, charging from all directions. I shot the first one in the leg, a boy about 10 years old. He went down screaming, but the others kept coming. I shot a girl in the shoulder, then dove sideways as 2 more jumped at me from behind. They fought like animals, using teeth and claws instead of strategy. But there were too many of them, and they were faster than any normal children should be. One of them got onto my back and bit my neck. Another grabbed my gun arm and tried to wrestle the weapon away. I rolled over, crushing the child on my back, then kicked the one holding my arm. For a moment, I was free. I scrambled to my feet and ran toward the largest building, hoping to find a place to make a stand. Behind me, the pack howled like wolves and gave chase. I burst through the door of the old dormitory and slammed it shut, then dragged a fallen beam across it as a barricade. Outside, I could hear them circling the building, testing the walls, looking for another way in. "Tommy!" I shouted. "Jenny! Bobby! Can you hear me?" A weak voice answered from somewhere in the back of the building. "Help us! We're in here!" I followed the voice to a door that had been reinforced with new wooden planks and secured with rope. I cut through the rope with my knife and led the door open. All 3 children were inside, dirty and frightened, but alive. Tommy had a bandaged cut on his arm, and Jenny was crying, but they were mobile. "Are you hurt?" I asked, kneeling down to check them over. "They made us eat weird food," Bobby said, "and they wouldn't let us go home. They said we had to stay and be their brothers and sisters." The building shook as something heavy hit the wall outside. The pack had found an old log and was using it as a battering ram. "We have to go," I said. "Right now." I led the children to a window at the back of the building and helped them climb out. The pack was focused on the front entrance, which gave us a few seconds head start. "Run toward the trail," I whispered. "Don't stop, don't look back, and don't leave the path. I'll be right behind you." The children took off running. I followed, turning back once to fire my last 2 shots at the wild children who were pouring out of the building. I didn't aim to kill. These were still children, no matter what they'd become, but I needed to slow them down. We ran for our lives through the darkening woods, the pack's howls echoing behind us. Tommy stumbled and fell, but I scooped him up and kept running. My lungs burned and my legs felt like rubber, but I couldn't stop, not with 3 young lives depending on me. We made it to the main trail just as my flare finally brought help. 2 state police officers and Agent Morrison were hiking up the path, drawn by the signal and the sound of gunshots. "Get these children to safety," I gasped. "Radio for medical and backup. There are more of them in the woods." But when the backup arrived an hour later, the wild children were gone. We searched for 3 days and found nothing except the ruined camp and Paul's body. It was like they'd vanished into the mountain itself. The official report blamed everything on a deranged hermit, who had been living illegally in the park. Paul Vincent was listed as killed by a bear, and the missing children were recorded as victims of abduction by an unknown suspect who fled the area when law enforcement arrived. Tommy, Jenny, and Bobby were returned to their families. The psychiatrist who examined them said they'd been traumatized but would recover with time and therapy. Their stories about wild children were explained as stress-induced hallucinations. I never corrected the record. 3 weeks after the incident, I hiked back to the old CCC camp alone. The buildings were empty, but I found signs that someone had been there recently. Fresh footprints in the mud, cold ashes from a recent fire, and a new drawing on the wall. This one showed stick figures hiking deeper into the mountains, heading toward the most remote areas of the park, areas where no trails existed, where even experienced hikers rarely ventured. They'd relocated, gone deeper into the wilderness where they'd be safe from discovery. I left supplies for them, canned food, blankets, basic medical kit. I told myself it was just in case they were really children who needed help. But the truth was, I felt responsible for them too. They were victims as much as Tommy, Jenny, and Bobby had been. Victims of the depression, of families too desperate to care for them, of 40 years of isolation that had turned them into something that wasn't quite human anymore. Every few months I go back and leave more supplies. The food always disappears, but I never see them. Sometimes I find new drawings on the walls, pictures of the pack, living their strange life in the deep mountains. The drawings show they've built new shelters, found new sources of food, maybe even recruited other abandoned children over the years. They're still out there. Other rangers have reported strange incidents over the years. Missing campers who turn up days later with no memory of where they've been. Children who claim they were visited by other kids during family camping trips. Footprints that appear overnight around campsites, always small and bare. I've trained every new ranger in my district to watch for the signs. I've changed our policies to require constant adult supervision for children in the backcountry. I've pushed for better communication equipment and faster response times for missing person cases. But mostly, I just wait and watch, because I know the pack is still growing, still hunting, still taking children when the opportunity presents itself. And someday, I might have to go back into those mountains and face them again. The difference is, next time I won't hesitate to do whatever it takes to stop them, even if they're just children who never had a chance to be anything else. Even if part of me understands why they do what they do. The mountains keep their secrets, but they don't keep them forever. Someday, someone else will discover the truth about the wild children of Old Rag Mountain. I just hope they're better prepared than I was. My name is Samuel Garrett, but everyone just calls me Sam. I've been a ranger here in Daniel Boone National Forest for 14 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these Kentucky mountains could throw at me. Boy, was I wrong. It was October 15th, 1963, when everything went to hell. The drought had been going on for weeks, making the leaves crunch under your boots like broken glass. Water levels were so low that caves we'd never seen before were opening up all over Red River Gorge. Some of them went down deep into the earth, deeper than anyone had ever mapped. I used to work in the coal mines before this job. My brother Eddie and we'd go down into the dark together every morning, come up black as night every evening. Then the mine collapsed in '49. I got out. Eddie didn't. That's why I became a ranger. Figured if I was going to spend my life keeping people safe, it'd be above ground where God intended. The call came in around noon. Sheriff's office said a family named Henderson, mom, dad, and 3 kids, hadn't come back from a camping trip. Their car was still at the trailhead near Serpent's Den Cave, but no sign of them anywhere. I knew that area well. The cave got its name from Cherokee stories my grandmother used to tell me. According to the old folks, something nasty lived down there once upon a time. Cherokee called it the Uktena, some kind of giant snake dragon thing. Of course, I never put much stock in ghost stories. Real dangers in these mountains are rock falls and bad air, not boogers and haints. I drove out to their campsite in my old Ford pickup, radio crackling with static. The deeper you go into the gorge, the worse the reception gets. Sometimes you're completely cut off from the outside world. The Henderson camp was strange from the get-go. Their tent was still up, sleeping bags laid out neat as you please. Coffee pots sat on the dead fire. Still had coffee in it. Car keys were sitting right there on the picnic table next to a half-eaten sandwich. Nobody just walks away from their keys like that. But what really got my attention was the smell coming from Serpent's Den Cave. I've been around a lot of caves and they usually smell like wet rock and bat droppings. This one smelled like rotten eggs. That sulfur smell you get around natural gas leaks. Made my nose burn just walking near the entrance. I grabbed my flashlight and took a look at the cave mouth. The opening was about 8 feet tall and maybe 6 feet wide, carved into the limestone cliff like a giant mouth. Recent rains had washed away dirt and debris, showing rock formations I'd never seen before. They looked almost like they'd been scratched or carved by something with claws. My flashlight started acting funny the closer I got to the cave. Brand new batteries, but the beam kept getting dimmer and dimmer. I smacked it a few times and it came back strong, but there was something wrong with the light itself. It seemed to get swallowed up by the darkness instead of pushing it back. I called out into the cave. "Hello, Henderson family. This is Ranger Garrett." My voice echoed back strange, like it was coming from way deeper than it should have. No answer, but I could swear I heard something moving around down there. Something big. That's when I noticed the ground. The dirt around the cave entrance was all torn up, like something heavy had been dragged in. I found scraps of blue fabric caught on the rocks. Looked like it came from a little girl's dress. There were other marks, too, in the soft earth near the cave mouth. Long scratches, too big to be from any animal I knew about. They were fresh. I should have waited for backup. That's what the manual says. Never enter a cave alone, especially not during a rescue operation. But I kept thinking, like about those 3 kids and what might be happening to them down there in the dark. Eddie's face flashed in my mind, the last time I saw him before the mine caved in. I couldn't let another family die underground while I stood around waiting for help. I radioed back to headquarters. "This is Garrett at Serpent's Den. Found evidence the Henderson family went into the cave, requesting backup and cave rescue team from Lexington." Static answered me. Then a voice, crackling and distant. "Copy that, Sam. Rescue team's about 2 hours out. You wait for them, you hear?" 2 hours. Those kids might not have 2 hours. I checked my gear, rope, first aid kit, emergency flares, compass. My compass was spinning like a top, needle jumping all over the place. Never seen anything like it. I gave it a shake, but it kept spinning. The cave entrance yawned in front of me like an open grave. The sulfur smell was getting stronger, and I could feel warm air flowing out of the opening. That was wrong, too. Caves are supposed to be cool, especially limestone caves like this one. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was how quiet it was. Not normal cave quiet. Caves usually have sounds. Water dripping, air moving, bats chittering. This place was silent as a tomb. Even my footsteps seemed to get swallowed up by the darkness. My flashlight beam showed a passage that went straight back into the mountain, about 10 feet wide and 8 feet high. The walls were smooth limestone, but they had those same scratch marks I'd seen outside. Long, deep gouges that ran parallel to each other, like something with claws had scraped along the rock. I followed the scratches deeper into the cave. The passage twisted and turned, going down at a steep angle. I could see scuff marks on the floor where people had walked or been dragged. There were more pieces of torn clothing too, a man's shirt button, a piece of denim from someone's jeans. About 50 yards in, I found the first bone. It was a human arm bone, picked clean and white. But what made my blood run cold was that it was still warm. Not body temperature warm, but warmer than it should have been sitting in a cool cave. And there were teeth marks on it, not human teeth, but something with fangs, big ones. I knelt down to look closer, and that's when I saw them. The spiral patterns. Someone, or something, had arranged human bones in perfect spirals on the cave floor. Arm bones, leg bones, ribs, all picked clean, all still carrying that strange warmth. My hands were shaking as I took pictures with the camera I always carried. Evidence. The sheriff would need evidence. That's when I heard it. Breathing. Deep, slow breathing, like something huge was sleeping somewhere deeper in the cave. Each breath sounded like wind through a tunnel, but there was something alive about it. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I called out again. "Henderson family, can you hear me?" My voice cracked a little. This time, I got an answer. Faint crying, sounding like it was coming from way down deep. A child's voice calling for help. I started moving faster, following the sound. The passage opened up into a bigger chamber, and my flashlight beam couldn't find the walls anymore. I was in some kind of underground room, bigger than a church. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above my head. The crying was louder now, echoing off the walls from somewhere ahead. But there were other sounds too, scraping noises, like something heavy being dragged across stone. And that breathing, getting louder and more regular. My radio crackled. "Sam, you there? This is Jake Morrison." Jake was my partner, another ranger who'd been working these mountains almost as long as I had. Good man, steady in a crisis. "Jake, thank God. I'm in Serpent's Den Cave. Found evidence of the Henderson family, but something's wrong down here. Real wrong. I'm at the cave entrance now, coming. In after you. Stay put till I catch up." "No, Jake, don't come in here alone. Wait for the rescue team." But the radio went dead, nothing but static. I kept moving forward, following the crying sounds. My flashlight was getting dimmer again, even though I'd just put new batteries in it that morning. The beam barely reached 10 feet now, and shadows seemed to move just outside its reach. The chamber I was in had passages leading off in 3 directions. The crying was coming from the middle passage, but there were other sounds coming from the left one, scraping, dragging sounds, and something else, a low rumbling that felt like it was coming up through the rock itself. I chose the middle passage. The tunnel got narrower as I went deeper, forcing me to duck down. More bones littered the floor, and now I was seeing things that made my stomach turn. Fresh bones. Some still had meat on them, and they weren't just scattered randomly. They were arranged in patterns. Symbols. The same symbols my Cherokee grandmother had shown me when I was little, carved into old trees and rocks. My grandmother used to say those symbols meant danger. Warning signs. Keep away. 20 yards down the passage, I found Jake Morrison. He was standing with his back to me, perfectly still, looking deeper into the cave. His flashlight was lying on the ground beside him, beam pointing at the wall. He didn't move when I called his name. "Jake? Jake, you okay?" When he turned around, I almost screamed. His eyes were reflecting my flashlight beam like an animal's eyes, bright green, glowing in the dark. And when he smiled, I saw that his teeth looked different, sharper. "Hello, Sam," he said. and his voice sounded wrong. Too deep, with an echo that shouldn't have been there. "I've been waiting for you." "Jake, what's wrong with you? Are you hurt?" He laughed, and the sound bounced off the cave walls like breaking glass. "Wrong? Nothing's wrong, Sam. Everything's exactly right. I've been keeping the old one fed for years now. Hikers, campers, lost hunters. It's been sleeping peacefully, Boo, because of me." The pieces started falling into place. All those missing persons reports over the years. People who'd just vanished in the mountains without a trace. Jake had been involved in most of those search and rescue operations. "The Henderson family," I said. "Where are they?" "Where they needed to be. Where you're going to be soon, Sam. The Uktena is getting hungry again, and it needs fresh meat." Uktena. My grandmother's stories came flooding back. The great serpent that lived underground, with a crystal in its forehead that could control men's minds. Cherokee warriors had tried to kill it once long ago, but the best they could do was drive it deep into the earth. "That's just a story, Jake. Cherokee legend." Jake's green eyes glowed brighter. "Is it? Look around you, Sam. Look at the bones. Look at the symbols. The old one has been here for hundreds of years, and it's going to be here for hundreds more." He started walking toward me, moving strange and jerky, like a puppet on strings. That's when I noticed his neck. There were marks on it, like burns in the shape of spirals. The same spirals the bones had been arranged in. I backed away, fumbling for the emergency flares in my belt. "Stay back, Jake. Don't make me hurt you." "You can't hurt me, Sam. The old one protects its servants, just like it's going to protect you once you've been marked." Behind Jake, deeper in the passage, I saw light. Not flashlight light, a strange, cold light that pulsed like a heartbeat. And in that light, I saw something move. Something huge and serpentine coiled in the darkness. The Uktena was real, and it was waking up. The light got brighter, and I could see more of the thing coiled in the depths of the cave. It was massive, easily 50 feet long, thick as a tree trunk. Its scales glittered in the cold light, and I could see its head now, raised up like a cobra's. In the center of its forehead was a crystal, clear as diamond, pulsing with that hypnotic light. Jake was still coming toward me, his movements getting more puppet-like with each step. The crystal's light reflected in his eyes, and I realized he wasn't in control anymore. Maybe he hadn't been for years. "The old one has been so patient," Jake said in that wrong voice. "Sleeping, waiting, feeding on whatever I could bring. But it's tired of scraps. It wants a feast." I pulled out one of my emergency flares and struck it. Red light flared up, pushing back the shadows. Jake hissed and covered his eyes, stumbling backward. "The light hurts when you're marked," he said. "But it won't save you. Nothing can save you now." I could hear the Uktena moving behind him, its massive body scraping against the cave walls. The crystal light got brighter, and I felt something trying to push into my mind. Whispers in a language I didn't understand, promising things I couldn't quite make out. I held the flare higher and backed toward the main chamber. "Where are the kids, Jake? The Henderson children? Are they still alive?" Jake smiled that horrible, sharp-toothed smile. "Why don't you ask them yourself?" From somewhere deeper in the cave, I heard crying again. But now I could tell it wasn't coming from children. The sound was wrong, like someone imitating the sound of crying without understanding what it meant. Bait. A trap. "It learns," Jake said. "Every person I've brought it, it learns a little more about humans. How to make the right sounds, how to draw people deeper. It's very smart, Sam. Smarter than you." The Uktena's head appeared in the passage behind Jake, and I got my first good look at it. Its eyes were the size of dinner plates, yellow with vertical pupils, like a snake's. But there was intelligence there, old and cold and hungry. The crystal in its forehead pulsed faster, and the whispers in my head got louder. I turned and ran. Behind me I heard Jake laughing and the sound of something huge sliding across stone. The Uktena was following me, moving faster thus, and something that big had any right to. I made it back to the main chamber and paused, trying to figure out which way led back to the entrance. The flare was burning down, throwing crazy shadows on the walls, In the red light, I could see more bones scattered around the chamber floor. Lots more bones. A sound made me look up. The Uktana's head appeared in the passage I'd just left, too big for the opening. But as I watched, the rock around the entrance began to crack and crumble. The thing was making the passage bigger, using its body to reshape the cave. I ran for what I hoped was the way out. The passage twisted and turned, and I quickly got lost. All the tunnels looked the same in the flare light, and the scratches on the walls seemed to be everywhere now. Some of them were fresh, carved deep into the limestone. My flare went out. Darkness swallowed me whole. I fumbled for my flashlight, but it was completely dead now. I tried the spare batteries in my pack, but they were drained too. Something about this place was sucking the power right out of them. I felt along the wall with my hands, trying to find my way. The rock was warm to the touch, and I could feel vibrations running through it. The Uktana was moving through the cave system, and it was close. That's when I found the chamber. My hands touched empty air where the wall should have been, and I stumbled into a round room. Even in the darkness, I could sense it was different from the rest of the cave. Older. The air smelled like smoke and old death. I struck another flare. I was in some kind of burial chamber. The walls were covered with Cherokee symbols carved deep into the rock. In the center of the room was a stone altar, stained dark with old blood, and arranged around the altar in perfect circles were hundreds of bones. Human bones, but old ones, ancient ones. Some of the bones still had jewelry on them, silver bracelets, copper necklaces, things the Cherokee would have worn centuries ago. This wasn't Jake's doing. This place had been here long before Jake was born. Long before any white man had set foot in these mountains. On the altar itself were fresh offerings, the Henderson family's belongings, a child's stuffed animal, a woman's wedding ring, a man's wallet, but no bodies. The Uktana preferred its food fresh. A sound made me spin around. Jake stood in the chamber entrance, but he looked different now. The burn marks on his neck had spread across his face in spiral patterns, and his skin had a greenish tint in the flare light. His eyes weren't just reflecting light anymore, they were glowing from within. "Welcome to the Old One's sacred place," he said. "Cherokee used to bring sacrifices here, hundreds of years ago. They understood what needed to be done to keep it sleeping." "What happened to them? The Cherokee?" "They got soft, started listening to missionaries and government agents, stopped bringing offerings. That's when the Uktana started getting restless, started hunting on its own." Jake stepped into the chamber, and I could see the thing behind him now. The Uktana filled the passage completely, its crystal glowing brighter as it got closer. "But I kept the old traditions alive," Jake continued. "Me and a few others over the years, park rangers, local hunters, people who understood. We kept it fed, kept it sleeping. Until now. Until now. It's tired of sleeping, Sam. Tired of hiding. It wants to hunt again, like it did in the old days, but first, it needs to mark you." The crystal light filled the chamber, and the whispers in my head became a roar. Images flashed through my mind. The Uktana rising from underground rivers, hunting through the mountains, feeding on anything it could catch. Cherokee warriors fighting it with spears and arrows, driving it back into the deep caves. The crystal in its forehead, the source of its power. That crystal was how it controlled people like Jake. But it was also its weakness. My grandmother had told me the rest of the story, the part Jake didn't know. The Cherokee hadn't just driven the Uktana underground, they'd damaged it, broken part of its crystal. That's why it needed servants like Jake now. That's why it had to hide in caves instead of hunting freely. The crystal could be broken, had been broken before. I looked around the chamber and saw what I needed. Ancient Cherokee spears leaned against the walls, probably left there by the last warriors who'd fought the thing. The obsidian points were still sharp after all these years. Jake saw me looking at the weapons and shook his head. "They won't work, Sam. Cherokee tried that already. The old one is too strong." But I wasn't planning to fight the Uktana with a spear. I had something the ancient Cherokee didn't have. Emergency flares, high-explosive emergency flares designed to burn hot enough to signal rescue planes from miles away. I grabbed a Cherokee spear and one of my remaining flares. The Uktana's head entered the chamber, crystal blazing. The whispers became screams, trying to force their way into my mind, trying to make me submit like Jake had. I thought about Eddie, trapped in the mine collapse. I thought about the Henderson children. I thought about all the people Jake had fed to this thing over the years. Then I closed my eyes, raised the spear, and charged. Running blind toward a 50-foot monster snake isn't something they teach you in ranger training. But I'd learned something in the coal mines that served me well. Sometimes you can't trust your eyes in the dark. Sometimes you have to trust your other senses. I could hear the Uktena breathing, smell its sulfur stench, feel the vibrations of its massive body coiled on the chamber floor. Even with my eyes closed, I knew exactly where its head was. The crystal's light was trying to burn through my eyelids, and the whispers were screaming now, prompta, advising terrible things if I didn't stop. But I kept running. Jake tried to intercept me, grabbing at my legs. I kicked him aside without opening my eyes and kept going. The spear felt good, Inns. My hands, balanced, sharp, ready. At the last second, I opened my eyes. The Uktena's head was right there, crystal blazing like a star. Its mouth was open, showing fangs as long as railroad spikes. For just a moment, I saw myself reflected in those huge yellow eyes. Then I drove the spear straight into the crystal. The obsidian point hit the gemstone dead center and stuck there, but didn't break through. The crystal was harder than I'd thought. But that was okay. I wasn't trying to break it with the spear. I let go of the spear and pulled the pin on my flare. The Uktena was thrashing now, trying to shake the spear loose. Its head whipped back and forth, crystal light strobing wildly. Jake was screaming somewhere behind me, clutching his head as the thing's pain echoed through him. I jammed the lit flare right against the crystal where the spear had made a small crack. High-explosive emergency flares burn at about 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt steel, hot enough to crack even the hardest gemstone if you get it right in a weak spot. The crystal held for about 3 seconds, then it shattered. The explosion of light was like looking into the sun. Even with my eyes squeezed shut, the flash burned through my eyelids and left me seeing spots. The Uktena's scream was like nothing I'd ever heard, part snake hiss, part mountain lion roar, part sound that had no name. Jake's scream cut off abruptly. When I could see again, he was lying on the chamber floor, the spiral burn marks fading from his skin. The glow was gone from his eyes, but so was everything else. They stared at the ceiling, empty and lifeless. The Uktena was thrashing in agony, its massive body slamming against the chamber walls. Chunks of rock fell from the ceiling. Without its crystal, the thing was hurt, confused, but definitely not dead. And it was angry. I had to get out of there before the whole chamber came down. I grabbed Jake's flashlight. It was working again now that the crystal was broken, and ran for the passage. Behind me, the Uktena was trying to follow, but its movements were clumsy now, uncontrolled. It kept running into walls, bringing down more rock. The passage back to the main chamber was partially blocked by fallen stones, but I managed to squeeze through. My ears were ringing from the crystal explosion, and I could taste blood in my mouth. Burns covered my hands and face from being so close to the flare when it went off. But I was alive, and more importantly, the Uktena couldn't control people anymore. I found my way back through the cave system by following the fresh air currents. My compass was working again, pointing steadily toward the exit. It took me almost an hour, crawling over rock falls and squeezing through tight passages, but finally I saw daylight ahead. I stumbled out of Serpent's Den cave just as the sun was setting. The rescue team from Lexington was waiting, along with half the sheriff's department. They'd been trying to raise me on the radio for hours. "Sweet Jesus, Sam," said Sheriff Collins. "What happened to you?" I looked back at the cave entrance. Deep underground, I could still hear the Uktena moving around, but the sounds were getting fainter. It was retreating deeper into the mountain, back to whatever hole it had crawled out of. "Cave in," I said. "Jake Morrison's still down there. The Henderson family, too." They wanted to send a team in immediately, but I convinced them to wait until morning. Told them the passages were unstable, that more people would just get hurt. It wasn't entirely a lie. Parts of the cave system had collapsed during my fight with the creature. That night, sitting in the hospital getting my burns treated, I made a decision. Some things are too dangerous to tell people about. Too unbelievable. The official report would say that Jake Morrison and the Henderson family died in a cave-in caused by the drought conditions. End of story. But I knew better, and I knew my job wasn't finished. The doctors kept me in the hospital for 3 days, treating the burns and checking me for concussion. My hearing came back mostly normal, though I still get a ringing in my ears when the weather changes. The burns on my face and hands healed up, but they left scars. Spiral-shaped scars that match the Cherokee symbols I'd seen carved in the cave. People ask about them sometimes. I tell them it's from a fire. They sealed up Serpent's Den cave with concrete and steel mesh, posting signs warning about unstable rock formations. Official state policy now says the whole area is off-limits to hikers and cavers. I made sure of that. But I know concrete and steel mesh won't stop the Uktena if it really wants to get out. It's just sleeping now, hurt and angry, waiting for its crystal to grow back. Cherokee legends say it takes 100 years, but who knows? Maybe less, maybe more. That's why I requested a transfer to permanent duty in the Red River Gorge area. Someone needs to keep an eye on things. Someone who knows what's really down there. The nightmares started about a week after I got out of the hospital. Every night I dream about yellow eyes and spiral symbols. Sometimes I wake up with the taste of sulfur in my mouth. Other times I catch myself drawing those Cherokee warning symbols on scraps of paper, even though I don't remember picking up the pen. I think breaking the crystal did something to me. Connected me to the thing somehow. I can feel when it's restless, sense when it's moving around down there in the deep caves. It's like having a splinter in your mind that you can't dig out. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. If I can feel it stirring, I can make sure nobody else goes where they shouldn't. I can keep people safe. The Cherokee Tribal Council elder came to see me about a month later. Old man named Joseph Crow Feather, must have been 8 if he was a day. He sat in my office drinking coffee and not saying much for the longest time. Finally, he spoke up. My grandmother told me stories about the old one. Said there was always someone who had to watch. Someone who'd touched its spirit and lived. Just stories, I said. He smiled and pointed at the spiral scars on my hands. Cherokee stories. But you wear our marks now, so maybe you understand. He left me a small leather pouch filled with tobacco and sage. Said to burn it if I ever felt the old one getting too restless. Sacred plants, blessed by medicine men. I keep it in my desk drawer, though I hope I never have to use it. I've noticed other caves opening up around the gorge as the drought continues. Some of them have that same sulfur smell, same warm air flowing out, same scratches on the rocks around the entrance. Could be natural formations. Could be the Uktena has made itself a new home, deeper in the mountain where concrete and steel can't reach. Either way, I'll be watching. My grandmother used to say that some burdens get passed down through the generations. Cherokee warriors who fought monsters, coal miners who died in cave-ins, rangers who disappear into the deep places and never come back. All part of the same story, she said. All part of keeping the darkness underground where it belongs. I understand now what she meant. Yesterday I found fresh scratches around a newly opened cave about 5 miles from Serpent's Den. Too big for any normal animal. Too deep. Too deliberate. And this morning I got a report about some campers who've gone missing in that area. Time to get back to work. My name is Daniel Whitehorse, and I need to tell you what really happened in the spring of 1976 at Pisgah National Forest. People think they know the truth about why Highway 64 suddenly changed routes. They think it was because of some rare Cherokee artifacts we found. That's only part of the story. I was 28 then, 6 years into my ranger job. My friends called me Dan, but my Cherokee grandmother always used my full name when she told me the old stories. She said names have power, especially in the mountains. I should have listened better to those stories. My job was special. I worked with cultural preservation, trying to protect Cherokee sites from being destroyed by progress. It wasn't easy being caught between two worlds. During the day, I wore my ranger uniform and followed federal rules. At night, I wondered if I was betraying my ancestors by letting developers tear up sacred ground. The little people are just stories, I told myself back then. Real threats are flash floods and lightning strikes. I was wrong about that too. Looking Glass Rock was my favorite patrol area. The granite dome rose up from the forest like a sleeping giant, all smooth stone and ancient power. Cherokee families had held ceremonies there for hundreds of years before white settlers came. The area felt different from other places, heavier somehow, like the air itself was holding its breath. That spring was strange. Thunderstorms hit us almost every day, bringing more rain than anyone could remember. The waterfalls ran thick and loud, and Looking Glass Falls roared like an angry beast. Lightning struck the mountainside so often that I started keeping count. 17 direct hits in 2 weeks. I was checking trail damage after one particularly bad storm when I met Dr. Sarah Fleming. She was a geologist from the university studying rock formations for some research project. Skis. Any woman with thick glasses and mud all over her hiking boots. "Ranger Whitehorse?" she called, waving a clipboard. "I'm glad you're here. I need to report something unusual." I walked over, stepping carefully on the wet rocks. "What's the problem, Dr. Fleming?" She pointed toward Looking Glass Falls, where the water crashed down in white sheets. "That lightning strike yesterday. It opened something up behind the waterfall. A cave entrance that wasn't there before." I followed her gaze. Sure enough, there was a dark opening in the rock face, hidden behind the falling water. It looked like a mouth, black and waiting. "Caves open up sometimes after heavy weather," I said. "Nothing too unusual about that. But this one's different." Dr. Fleming stepped closer, lowering her voice even though we were alone. "I was taking measurements this morning and I heard something coming from inside. Voices, Ranger Whitehorse, and music." The hair on my neck stood up, but I kept my expression neutral. "Probably just echoes from the water. Sound bounces funny in cave systems." She shook her head hard. "No, this was different. It sounded like people singing, old songs, in a language I didn't recognize." I knew what language it probably was, but I didn't tell her that. My grandmother's voice whispered in my memory. "The Nunahai live inside the mountains, Danny. They've been there since the world was young, watching over sacred places." "I'll check it out," I told Dr. Fleming. "In the meantime, stay away from the cave. These rock formations can be unstable after storms." She nodded and headed back down the trail, but I could see she wasn't satisfied. People like her, scientists, researchers, they had to poke at mysteries until they figured them out. It was dangerous thinking in a place like this. I stood there for a long time, staring at that dark opening behind the waterfall. Part of me wanted to hike down immediately and investigate. The other part, the part that remembered my grandmother's warnings, wanted to turn around and pretend I'd never seen it. Thunder rolled across the mountains, and I made my choice. I'd come back tomorrow with proper equipment and check out the cave, just to be safe, just to make sure there wasn't anything dangerous in there. That night I couldn't sleep. Rain hammered on my cabin roof, and every time lightning flashed, I thought I could hear something else mixed in with the thunder. Something that sounded like voices, singing in Cherokee. The next morning dawned clear and cold. I packed my gear, flashlight, rope, first aid kit, radio, and hiked back to Looking Glass Falls. The storm had passed, but the waterfall still roared with yesterday's rain. I called Dr. Fleming on my radio. "This is Ranger Whitehorse. I'm checking out that cave you mentioned." Static crackled back at me. "Roger that, Ranger. Be careful in there." Getting behind the waterfall was tricky. The rocks were slippery and spray soaked through my jacket in seconds. But I made it to the cave entrance without falling. The opening was bigger than it had looked from a distance, easily tall enough for a person to walk through. Cool air flowed out, carrying a smell I couldn't identify. Not musty like most caves, but clean somehow, like mountain air after rain. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped inside. The cave tunnel stretched ahead of me, carved smooth by water or something else. My footsteps echoed strangely, creating sounds that almost seemed like voices whispering back. I told myself it was just acoustics. 20 feet in, my radio started crackling. "Dr. Fleming, do you copy?" Nothing but static. I tried again. Still nothing. 50 feet in, my flashlight began to flicker. I smacked it against my palm and the beam steadied. Must be the dampness affecting the batteries. 100 feet in, I heard the singing. It was soft at first, just a whisper of melody that might have been wind through stone. But as I stood still and listened, Enid, it grew stronger. Multiple voices harmonizing in Cherokee, singing words I recognized from childhood ceremonies. The hair on my arms stood straight up. This wasn't my imagination or echoes from the waterfall. Someone was singing in here. "Hello?" I called out. "This is Ranger Whitehorse. Is someone in here?" The singing stopped immediately. I waited in the sudden silence, heart hammering. Then from somewhere deeper in the cave came a sound like laughter. Not mean laughter, but the kind children make when they're playing hide and seek and someone's getting close to finding them. I should have left right then. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of that cave and never come back. But I was a ranger, and it was my job to investigate. At least, that's what I told myself. I kept walking deeper into the mountain. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and my flashlight beam revealed something impossible. The walls were carved with pictures, not crude scratches, but detailed artwork showing Cherokee ceremonies, dancing figures, and symbols I'd seen in my grandmother's books. But these carvings looked fresh, like they'd been made yesterday. In the center of the chamber sat a circle of stones arranged around a cold fire pit. The stones were smooth and round, each one about the size of a person's head. But they weren't ordinary rocks. They glowed with a soft blue light that had nothing to do with my flashlight. I knelt down beside one of the stones, and it pulsed brighter, like it was responding to my presence. "Beautiful, aren't they?" I spun around, nearly dropping my flashlight. Dr. Fleming stood in the tunnel entrance, but something was wrong with her. Her clothes were different. Not the hiking gear she'd been wearing yesterday, but traditional Cherokee dress, deerskin and beadwork that looked like it came from a museum. "Dr. Fleming, how did you get in here?" She smiled, but it wasn't quite her smile. "The Nunahai brought me. They've been waiting so long for someone to find this place." "The what?" But I knew what she'd said, the little people of Cherokee legend. "You understand," she said, walking toward me. "You have the blood. You can hear them singing too." She was right. Even as we talked, I could hear the voices again, soft and sweet, coming from the glowing stones themselves. They were singing a lullaby my grandmother used to hum about brave warriors and protective spirits. "Dr. Fleming, we need to get out of here. Something's not right." She laughed, and it was that same childlike sound I'd heard before. "Nothing's wrong, Daniel Whitehorse. Everything's exactly as it should be. The mountain has chosen us." My radio crackled to life. "Ranger Whitehorse, this is base. What's your status?" I grabbed for the radio, but Dr. Fleming was faster. She knocked it from my hand, and it clattered across the stone floor, going silent. "They don't understand," she said. "The outside world can't hear what we hear, can't see what we see." "What are you talking about?" She gestured to the carved walls. "Look closer, Daniel. Really look." I shined my flashlight on the carvings again, and this time I saw movement. The carved figures were dancing, their stone limbs shifting in the blue glow. Cherokee dancers celebrating around fires that flickered with real flame despite being carved from rock. "It's impossible," I whispered. "Is it?" Dr. Fleming's voice was changing, becoming lighter, younger. "Your grandmother told you the stories. The Nunahai who saved Cherokee children during the Trail of Tears, who brought them inside the mountain to safety." The singing grew louder, and I saw them. Small figures, no taller than children but clearly adult, dressed in traditional Cherokee clothing from centuries past. They sat on the glowing stones, watching us with ancient, knowing eyes. One of them, wearing a war chief's feathers, stood and walked toward me. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The cave floor, felt soft under my feet, like I was sinking into warm earth. The war chief spoke in Old Cherokee, words my conscious mind didn't understand, but my blood recognized. He was welcoming me home. I don't know how long I stood there listening to the war chief's words wash over me like warm water. Time felt different in the cave, thick and slow, like honey. When I finally blinked and looked around, Dr. Fleming was gone. "Where is she?" I asked, but my voice sounded strange, distant. The war chief smiled and gestured deeper into the cave system. Through tunnels I hadn't noticed before, I could see flickering firelight and hear more voices. A whole community living inside the mountain. I tried to step backward toward the entrance, but the stone floor rippled under my feet like water. The Nunehai weren't holding me prisoner exactly, but they weren't letting me leave either. "What do you want?" I asked. The war chief pointed to the tunnel entrance, then made a chopping motion with his hand. He spoke in Cherokee again, and somehow I understood. Danger coming. Destroyers. Must stop. Images flashed in my mind, not my own thoughts, but memories the Nunehai were sharing with me. Government surveyors with their machines, marking trees and measuring distances. Plans to blast through the mountain for a new highway. The sacred cave system would be destroyed, along with all the Cherokee spirits who called it home. "The highway project," I whispered. "You want me to stop the highway?" The war chief nodded, but his expression was sad. He showed me more images. Cherokee families forced from their land, children crying as soldiers burned their homes, the long walk west where so many died. The Nunehai had saved who they could, bringing them into the mountain sanctuary. But now, even this safe place was threatened. A sound from the tunnel entrance made us all turn. Dr. Fleming was back, but she looked different again. Older somehow, with streaks of gray in her hair and lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. "How long was I gone?" she asked, but her voice was dreamy, like she was talking in her sleep. I checked my watch. It had stopped working. "I don't know. A few minutes?" She laughed. "Minutes? I've been walking through the most beautiful places. Gardens that grow without sunlight, streams that flow upward, rooms full of children who never age." She looked at me with eyes that seemed to hold centuries. "They saved so many, Daniel. During the worst times, when our people were being hunted and killed, the Nunehai opened the mountains and brought them to safety. Dr. Fleming, we need to leave. Now." I tried to move toward the entrance again, but the stone floor held my feet like quicksand. "Leave?" She looked confused. "Why would we want to leave? This is where we belong, where our people have always belonged." That's when I realized she wasn't just Dr. Sarah Fleming anymore. The Nunehai had filled her with memories, Cherokee memories from the past. She was seeing the world through the eyes of ancestors who had lived centuries ago. The war chief spoke again, and this time I understood every word. He was telling me about the surveyors who would come in 3 days, about the explosives they would use to clear a path through Looking Glass Rock, about how all of this would be destroyed unless someone stopped them. "I can't fight the government," I said. "I work for them." But even as I spoke, I felt the mountains pull. The Nunehai weren't just asking for my help. They were offering me something, a connection to my heritage that I'd never felt before, a chance to truly belong somewhere. Dr. Fleming was changing before my eyes. Her university clothes had become traditional Cherokee dress, her skin taking on the golden glow of the Nunehai themselves. She was becoming one of them, choosing to stay in the mountain forever. "Don't you feel it?" she asked. "The peace, the rightness of this place?" I did feel it. The cave was warm and welcoming, full of the voices of my ancestors. Part of me wanted nothing more than to sit down on one of those glowing stones and listen to their stories until the world outside ceased to matter. But another part of me remembered my ranger duties, my life on the surface, the responsibility I had to protect both the forest and the people who visited it. "There has to be another way," I said. The war chief shook his head sadly and showed me one final vision. Machines tearing through the mountainside, Ancient Cherokee burial grounds bulldozed for road gravel. The cave system flooded with concrete and steel. That's when the first tremor shook the mountain. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the glowing stones flickered like candles in the wind. Outside, I could hear thunder rolling across the peaks, but this wasn't natural thunder. This was the sound of the mountain itself groaning under some tremendous pressure. "What's happening?" I shouted over the noise. Dr. Fleming grabbed my arm, her fingers surprisingly strong. "They're angry," she said. "The Nunahai are angry. The surveyors came early." Through the cave entrance, I could see flashes of unnatural light. Not lightning, but something else. The mountain was fighting back against the intruders, and the battle was just beginning. The war chief gestured urgently toward the deeper tunnels. He wanted us to go further into the mountain, away from whatever was happening outside. But I couldn't abandon my post. Whatever was going on out there, people might need help. "I have to go," I told him. He caught my arm and spoke rapidly in Cherokee. I understood enough to know he was warning me. If I left the cave now, the outside world might never let me return. The choice had to be made now: stay with the Nunahai and help them fight from within the mountain, or return to my ranger duties and try to find another solution. Dr. F. Fleming was already walking toward the deeper tunnels, her transformation almost complete. Soon, she would be just another Cherokee spirit, protecting the mountain for eternity. The thunder. Outside grew louder, and I heard something else. Helicopters. Men shouting. The surveyors had brought a lot more equipment than usual, and they weren't taking any chances. I made my choice. I ran through the waterfall and into chaos. 3 government helicopters circled Looking Glass Rock, their rotors whipping the trees into a frenzy. Men in hard hats and orange vests were setting up equipment near the base of the falls, while others climbed the granite face with drilling gear. They weren't supposed to be here for another 3 days, but someone had moved up the timeline. The mountain was fighting back. Lightning struck continuously now, bolt after bolt slamming into the helicopter rotors. The pilots struggled to maintain control as violent wind gusts came from nowhere, spinning their aircraft like toys. On the ground, drill bits snapped and electronic equipment sparked and died. The men looked terrified but kept working, driven by orders they couldn't ignore. I spotted the survey team leader, a man in a white hard hat who was shouting into a radio. I ran over to him. "Sir, you need to evacuate your people. This area is experiencing severe weather anomalies." He looked at me with irritated eyes. "You're the local ranger? Good. We need you to clear any hikers from the blast zone. We're detonating charges in 30 minutes. 30 minutes? I wasn't notified of any schedule change. Emergency authorization came through this morning. Something about mineral deposits that can't wait." He handed me a clipboard with official-looking papers. "Your job is to keep civilians clear, not ask questions." I scanned the documents. They were signed by officials I'd never heard of, authorizing immediate excavation of strategically important materials discovered in the Looking Glass Rock Formation. Someone had found something valuable enough to bypass all the normal environmental protections. Another lightning strike hit so close that I felt the electricity in the air. The survey leader's radio crackled and went dead. "Sir, this isn't safe. The weather conditions are within acceptable parameters." He cut me off. "We have a job to do." But his men were starting to panic. The drilling equipment kept failing, and every time they tried to set a charge, the rock face seemed to shift slightly, making their measurements useless. 2 of the helicopters had been forced to land after their instruments went haywire. That's when I saw her. Dr. Fleming stood on a ledge halfway up Looking Glass Rock, but she wasn't alone. Dozens of small figures surrounded her. The Nunahai, no longer hiding in the cave, but standing openly on the mountainside. They glowed with soft blue light, clearly visible to anyone who looked up. The survey crew saw them too. "What the hell are those?" one of the workers shouted, pointing. The team leader grabbed binoculars and focused on the ledge. His face went white. "Some kind of people. Kids, maybe? How did they get up there?" But they weren't kids, and they weren't normal people either. As I watched, one of the Nunahai raised his hand, and a gust of wind knocked a surveyor off his feet. Another gestured toward a helicopter, and its engine began smoking. "They're protecting the mountain," I said, but the team leader wasn't listening. "We need those people off the rock face before we detonate," he barked into his backup radio. "Send a climbing team up there." "No!" I grabbed his arm. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." He shoved me away. "I understand perfectly. Some hippie protesters have occupied the blast zone. Standard procedure is to remove them by force if necessary." 3 men with climbing gear started up the rock face, heading straight for the ledge where the Nunehai waited. I knew with terrible certainty that those climbers were walking into something they couldn't comprehend or survive. I had to choose: follow my federal orders and help clear the protesters, or try to protect men who were about to encounter forces beyond their understanding. The war chief's voice echoed in my mind, speaking Cherokee words that burned themselves into my consciousness. "The mountain remembers all who harm it, but it also remembers those who defend it." I made my choice. I ran to the base of the rock face and started climbing, taking a route parallel to the survey team. I had to reach the Nunehai first, had to try to negotiate some kind of solution before this turned into a massacre. Climbing Looking Glass Rock without proper equipment was dangerous enough under normal conditions. With supernatural winds trying to tear me off the stone and lightning striking every few seconds, it was almost impossible. But somehow I made it, pulling myself onto the ledge just as the survey climbers reached the same level 50 feet away. Dr. Fleming stood with the war chief, both of them watching the approaching men with expressions of deep sadness. "Daniel," she said, and her voice carried the weight of centuries. "You came back. Dr. Fleming, you have to stop this. Those men don't know what they're doing." She smiled, but it wasn't quite human anymore. "Neither do you. Not yet." The war chief stepped forward and placed his hand on my forehead. Suddenly I could see what he saw: the entire mountain as a living entity, honeycombed with caves and passages where Cherokee spirits had lived for generations. Sacred burial grounds, ceremonial chambers, and places where the boundary between the physical and spirit worlds was thin as paper. And I saw what the government survey had really found: not just mineral deposits, but a massive cave system full of Cherokee artifacts worth millions of dollars to collectors. The highway was just an excuse to legally strip mine one of the most sacred sites in Cherokee history. "They can't have it," I whispered. "Then help us stop them," the war chief says, right in perfect English. The survey climbers were almost to our ledge, their leader talking urgently into his radio. Below, I could see the team preparing to detonate their charges whether we were clear or not. I looked at Dr. Fleming, at the Nunehai, at the sacred mountain that had sheltered Cherokee people for centuries. Then I looked at the government men who wanted to destroy it all for profit. "What do you need me to do?" The war chief smiled and began to glow brighter. Around him, all the Nunehai raised their hands toward the sky. The mountain began to sing. What happened next depends on who you ask. The official report says that an unprecedented lightning storm caused massive electromagnetic interference, disabling all government equipment and forcing an emergency evacuation. The survey team leader filed a complaint about local interference with federal operations, but his superiors quietly buried the report when independent geologists confirmed that the mountain contained significant archaeological treasures requiring immediate federal protection. The unofficial story, whispered among Cherokee families, is different. They say the mountain spirits finally revealed themselves to protect their sacred home. They say a Cherokee ranger helped the Nunehai drive off the destroyers with wind and lightning and voices that shook the earth itself. I know what really happened. When the Nunehai began to sing, every piece of electronic equipment within 5 miles stopped working. The helicopters had to auto-rotate to emergency landings, radios went silent, and even digital watches froze at exactly 3:47 p.m. But more than that, the song reached inside every person on that mountainside and showed them the truth about where they were. The survey climbers saw Cherokee children hiding in the caves during the Trail of Tears. The helicopter pilots saw ancient ceremonies performed on the rock face by firelight. The team leader saw generations of Cherokee people buried in grounds he'd planned to excavate. Dr. Fleming never came down from the mountain. The official story says she suffered altitude sickness and exposure, requiring extended medical treatment. But I know better. She chose to stay with the Nunahai to become one of the guardians of Looking Glass Rock. Sometimes, when the moon is full, hikers report seeing a woman in traditional Cherokee dress standing on the high ledges, keeping watch. The highway was rerouted around the mountain. Looking Glass Rock became the Looking Glass Cultural Heritage Area, jointly managed by the National Park Service and the Cherokee Nation. I became the first official cultural preservation specialist, responsible for protecting Cherokee sites throughout the Appalachians. My job description says I monitor archaeological sites and maintain relationships with tribal historians. What I really do is listen for singing stones and watch for signs that other sacred places need protection. Because Looking Glass Rock wasn't the only Cherokee sanctuary in these mountains, and it won't be the last to face threats from the outside world. Sometimes, late at night, I return to the cave behind the waterfall. The glowing stones are still there, and so are the Nunahai. They welcome me back like family, sharing stories of the old days and visions of challenges yet to come. They've given me the ability to see beyond the normal world, to sense when Cherokee spirits are in danger, and to communicate with forces most people never know exist. I keep my ranger uniform and my federal badge, but I serve different masters now. When developers want to build shopping malls on Cherokee burial grounds, strange accidents happen to their equipment. When mining companies try to blast through sacred caves, their explosives mysteriously fail. When archaeologists attempt to steal Cherokee artifacts, they find themselves hopelessly lost in mountain fog that shouldn't exist. The mountains remember everything, and now they have a Cherokee Ranger to help them protect what matters most. My name is Daniel Whitehorse, and I guard the places where two worlds meet. The little people aren't just stories, and Looking Glass Rock isn't just another tourist destination. Some things are too sacred to be destroyed, too powerful to be bought, and too important to be forgotten. The singing stones remember, and so do I. My name is Liz Carpenter, and I've been a forest ranger for 11 years now. I know these West Virginia woods like the back of my hand. Every trail, every creek, every old logging road that cuts through the cranberry wilderness. I've seen black bears up close, pulled lost hikers out of ravines, and dealt with more bug problems than I care to count. That's actually my specialty. Bugs. I have a degree in studying insects, and when something's eating our trees or making campers miserable, they call me. But I'd never seen anything like what I found that hot July morning in 1984. The call came in around 6 a.m. Two backpackers were overdue from a 3-day hike, and their families were worried sick. Park Service protocol is pretty clear. We give experienced hikers some wiggle room, but when they don't show up a full day past their planned return, we go looking. I grabbed my gear and headed out in my truck, windows down because the AC had been broken for 2 months. The forest felt wrong that morning, though I couldn't put my finger on why. It was too quiet. No bird songs, no squirrels chattering, no buzz of insects. Just the sound of my tires on gravel and the hot wind through the trees. The missing hiker's car was still parked at the Pine Ridge trailhead, covered in a thick layer of dust. I checked the registration, Dave and Susan Martinez from Pittsburgh. Their permit said they planned to camp at Blue Creek about 8 miles in, easy hike for experienced people, which their gear suggested they were. I shouldered my pack and started up the trail. The heat was already brutal at 7 a.m., and sweat was running down my back before I'd gone half a mile. The drought had been going on for 6 weeks now, leaving the forest dry as kindling. Even the creek beds were just cracked mud and scattered rocks. But it wasn't the heat that bothered me. It was the silence. In 11 years of walking these trails, I'd never been in woods this quiet. No insects humming, no birds calling, nothing. Just the sound of my boots on the hard-packed earth and my own breathing. Every forest ranger knows that when the animals go quiet, something's very wrong. I found their first camp at Miller's Clearing, right where they'd marked it on their permit. The site was clean and properly set up. These people knew what they were doing, but there were no footprints leaving the camp. It was like Dave and Susan had just vanished into thin air. I radioed back to headquarters. "Base, this is Carpenter. Found the first campsite. No sign of the hikers, but something's off here. The wildlife activity is unusual." "Define unusual," came the crackling reply from dispatch. I looked around the empty clearing, trying to put it into words. "Complete absence of insects and birds. I haven't seen so much as a fly since I started hiking." "Weather-related?" "Negative. This isn't normal behavior for drought conditions." I spent another hour searching the area, looking for any sign of where Dave and Susan might have gone. That's when I found the first web. It was stretched between two oak trees about 20 feet apart, and it was huge. I'm talking bigger than a beach towel, with strands as thick as guitar strings. The morning sun caught it just right, making the whole thing shimmer like silver. I'd never seen anything like it. In all my years studying insects, I knew that no North American spider could build something that big. The physics just don't work. Spiders breathe through tiny holes in their bodies, and once they get past a certain size, they can't get enough oxygen. It's basic biology. But there it was, impossible and beautiful and completely wrong. I got out my camera and took pictures from every angle, then carefully collected a sample of the web material with my knife. The stuff was incredibly strong. I had to really saw at it to cut through even a single strand. It felt more like steel cable than spider silk. As I sealed the sample in a plastic bag, I noticed something else that made my skin crawl. The web wasn't empty. There were bundles hanging from it, wrapped up tight in silk. At first I thought they might be insects or small animals, but they were too big. Much too big. I got out my binoculars for a closer look, and my blood went cold. Those weren't insects in the web. They were sleeping bags. 2 of them, wrapped up neat as Christmas presents and hanging 30 feet off the ground. My hands were shaking as I radioed for backup. "Base, I need a search and rescue team at grid coordinates 37 Alpha, full equipment, and send Dr. Harrison from the university." "What's your situation, Carpenter?" I stared up at those silk-wrapped bundles swaying in the morning breeze. "I think I've found our missing hikers." It took 3 hours for the rescue team to reach me. 3 hours I spent staring at that impossible web and trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I walked circles around the 2 oak trees, looking for any explanation that didn't involve giant spiders. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe some college kids had rigged up fake web material and hung mannequins in sleeping bags as a joke. Maybe I was having some kind of breakdown from the stress of my divorce 6 months ago. Any explanation seemed more likely than the truth my eyes were showing me. But when the rescue team arrived with their climbing gear and lowered those bundles to the ground, all my rational explanations fell apart. Dave and Susan Martinez weren't in their sleeping bags. They were wrapped in silk, cocooned like insects in a spider's web. The silk covered them completely, molded tight against their bodies. Through the translucent material, I could see their faces, peaceful, almost like they were sleeping. "Jesus Christ," muttered Tom Bradley, our lead climber. He'd been doing rescues for 15 years and had seen every kind of accident the forest could. Dish out. "What the hell did this to them?" Dr. Harrison arrived an hour later. I'd called him because he was the best entomologist within 100 miles, and if anyone could explain the web, it would be him. He took one look at my silk samples and went pale. "This protein structure is unique," he said, squinting at the material under his portable microscope. "I've never seen anything like it. The tensile strength is off the charts, stronger than steel cable of equivalent thickness." "What kind of spider could make this?" I asked. He looked up at me with worried eyes. "That's just it, Liz. No spider could make this. The largest orb weaver in North America has a leg span of maybe 4 inches. To build a web this size with this material would require a spider the size of a dinner table. And that's impossible? Biologically impossible. Arthropod respiratory systems can't support that kind of size increase. They'd suffocate under their own body weight." The medical examiner's report made things even stranger. Dave and Susan Martinez had died from blood loss, but there were no major wounds on their bodies. just two small puncture marks on each of their necks, perfectly round and about an inch apart. The marks were so precise they looked almost surgical. "Looks like snake bites," the ME told me. "But no snake in West Virginia has fangs that size." "What about the blood loss?" "That's the weird part. Their bodies were completely drained, but there's no blood anywhere at the scene. It's like something drank them dry and didn't spill a drop." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those puncture wounds and that impossible web. I'd been a ranger long enough to know that the forest holds secrets, old things that don't make it into the biology textbooks. But this was different. This felt intelligent. The next morning brought two more disappearances. Jerry and Linda Walsh, a married couple from Ohio, had been camping at Devil's Fork, about 2 miles from where we'd found the Martinez bodies. Their tent was still set up, breakfast half cooked, on their camp stove. But they were gone, and there wasn't a single footprint leading away from their campsite. What there was, stretching between the trees above their tent, was another web. This one was even bigger than the first, and it held 2 more silk-wrapped bundles. But these bundles were different. They were moving. I could see them twisting and turning 30 feet above the ground, like whatever was inside was trying to get out, or like something was still alive in there. "We need to get them down now," I told the rescue team. But as Tom Bradley started climbing toward the first bundle, something moved in the trees above him. Something big. "Tom, stop climbing," I called out, my voice barely a whisper. "What? Why?" I pointed up into the canopy. There, silhouetted against the morning sky, was the outline of something that shouldn't exist. It was huge, maybe 6 feet across, with 8 long legs and a body that seemed to shift and change as it moved. For just a moment I could have sworn I saw something human about its shape, like a woman's torso where the spider's head should be. Then it was gone, vanishing into the thick leaves faster than my eyes could follow. "Did you see that?" I asked Tom. "See what?" I looked around at the other rescue workers. They were all staring at me like I'd lost my mind. "Nothing," I said. "Just be careful up there." We got Jerry and Linda Walsh down from that web, but they were already dead. Same puncture wounds, same complete blood loss, same peaceful expressions on their faces. Whatever was doing this wasn't just killing people, it was preserving them, keeping them fresh like food in a refrigerator. That's when I knew we weren't dealing with any ordinary predator. We were up against something that planned, something that thought, something that was getting better at hunting humans. And it was getting bolder. The next attack happened in broad daylight. I was following a game trail near Sunset Rock, looking for more webs, when I heard screaming. Real screaming, the kind that comes from pure terror. I ran toward the sound, crashing through thick undergrowth, branches tearing at my clothes. I found them in a clearing I'd never seen before, even though I thought I knew every inch of these woods. 3 college kids from Charleston, probably day hikers who'd wandered off the marked trails. 2 boys and a girl, maybe 20 years old. The girl was already wrapped up and hanging from a web that stretched between 4 trees like a giant hammock. But the boys were still on the ground, backing away from something I couldn't see clearly. It moved too fast, staying just at the edge of my vision, a dark blur that seemed to flow rather than walk. "Run!" I shouted to the boys. "Get out of here!" One of them tried to run. He made it maybe 10 steps before something invisible knocked him down. I heard the sound of tearing fabric, then a soft thud as his body hit the ground. By the time I reached him, he was already wrapped in silk, his face disappearing under the white material. The third boy was pressed against a tree, crying and shaking. "Please," he kept saying, "please don't hurt me." That's when I heard the voice. It was a woman's voice, soft and gentle, like a mother comforting a frightened child. But it came from somewhere above us, up in the canopy where no human could be. "Shh," the voice whispered. "Don't be afraid, little one. Mama's here now. Mama will take care of you." I looked up and saw her clearly for the first time. She was hanging upside down from a thick web strand, maybe 15 feet above our heads. From the waist up, she looked like a woman. Pale skin, long black hair, even a human face that might have been beautiful once. But from the waist down, she was pure spider. A huge, bulbous abdomen covered in coarse hair, with 8 long legs that moved with horrible grace. "You're frightening my children," she said to me, tilting her head like a curious bird. Her voice was still gentle, but there was something wrong with it, something that made my skin crawl. "They need to rest now. They need to be safe." The third boy tried to run. The spider woman moved faster than anything I'd ever seen, dropping from her web and flowing across the ground like water. Her human hands grabbed the boy around the waist while her spider legs held him still. I heard a soft puncture sound. Then the boy went limp. "There," she said, beginning to wrap him in silk that seemed to pour out of her body. "Safe now. Mama's children are always safe." I should have run. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of that clearing and never come back. But I'm a ranger. These were my woods, and these were people under my protection. I pulled out my service weapon, a .38 revolver that suddenly felt like a toy in my hands. "Let him go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The spider woman looked at me with eyes that were completely human. Brown eyes, sad eyes, eyes that had been crying for a very long time. "You're hurt," she said. "I can smell it on you. Someone broke your heart, didn't they? Left you all alone?" I thought about my ex-husband, about coming home to an empty house for 6 months now, about throwing myself into work so I wouldn't have to think about how lonely I was. "I know what that feels like," the spider woman continued. "I lost my children too, all of them. The fever took them in the winter of 1847, one by one, until I had nobody left." She finished wrapping the boy and hung him from the web with the others. 3 more bundles, 3 more lives ended. "But I learned how to keep them safe," she said. "How to make sure they never leave me again. Would you like that? Would you like to be safe with your mama forever?" I raised my gun, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely aim. "You can't hurt me with that little thing," she said. Not unkindly. "I've been shot before. Stabbed, burned, poisoned. Nothing works. Nothing can separate a mother from her children." She started moving toward me, her spider legs carrying her in a smooth, horrible glide across the forest floor. "I've been so lonely," she whispered. "So very lonely. But you could stay with me. We could be a family." I emptied all 6 shots into her center mass. The bullets hit her human torso and drew black blood, but she didn't even slow down. If anything, the wounds seemed to close up as I watched. "Run away, little ranger," she said, reaching out with one pale hand. "But don't go far. Mama will find you when you're ready." I ran. God help me, I ran like a coward and left those 3 kids hanging in her web. I crashed through the woods, branches whipping my face until I reached the main trail. Then I kept running until I got back to my truck. I sat there for an hour, shaking and trying to figure out what to do next. I couldn't call for backup. Who would believe me? I couldn't evacuate the whole forest. We'd have hikers scattered across 50 square miles, and I couldn't just pretend it wasn't happening. Those 3 kids were dead because I hadn't been fast enough, smart enough, brave enough to stop her. But they weren't the last. The spider woman had been hunting in these woods for over 100 years, and she wasn't going to stop now. She was getting stronger, bolder, more confident in her hunting, and I was the only one who knew the truth about what was out there, the only one who could stop her. I spent the next 3 days learning everything I could about spiders. Not the kind I'd studied in college, the normal kind that ate flies and hid in corners. I needed to understand how to kill something that was half spider, half woman, and apparently immortal. The answer came from an old book about Appalachian folklore that Dr. Hart, Risen, lent me. It told the story of Spider Granny, a woman named Martha Webb, who'd lost her children to scarlet fever in the 1840s. According to the legend, she'd made a deal with something dark and old, trading her humanity for the power to keep her children safe forever. The spider mother feeds on life essence, the book said. She preserves her victims like food, keeping them fresh in her web for months or even years. But she is vulnerable to the same poisons that kill her smaller cousins, if the dose is strong enough. I knew exactly what that meant. In my ranger station, I had access to industrial-strength pesticides designed for dealing with invasive insects. If I could modify the formula, increase the concentration, maybe I could create something that would actually hurt her. I worked all night mixing chemicals, creating the most potent spider poison I could manage. Then I loaded it into a crop sprayer tank and strapped the whole thing to my back like a flamethrower. But first, I had to find her again. I went back to the clearing where I'd seen her last, but it was empty. The webs were gone, the bodies were gone, even the trees looked different somehow. It was like the whole place had been erased. That's when I realized something that chilled me to the bone. The Spider Woman could change the forest itself, rearranging the landscape to suit her needs. She wasn't just living in these woods, she was controlling them. I spent hours walking in circles, looking for any sign of her presence. The sun was starting to set when I finally found what I was looking for. Fresh web strands leading deeper into the forest, toward the old logging camp that had been abandoned since the 1950s. The camp was a cluster of rotting buildings in a clearing that hadn't seen sunlight in decades. Massive trees grew up around the structures, their branches forming a canopy so thick it felt like walking into a cave. And stretched between every tree, connecting building to building, was the largest web I'd ever seen. It was like a city made of silk, layer upon layer, of webbing forming tunnels and chambers and hanging galleries. And everywhere I looked, there were bundles, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Some of the bundles were fresh and white, but others were old and yellowed. Some were big enough to hold adults. Others were heartbreakingly small. Children. She'd been taking children, too. "Welcome home," came that soft voice from somewhere above me. I looked up and saw her descending from the web on a single strand of silk, moving with the grace of a ballet dancer. In the dim light filtering through the canopy, she looked almost beautiful, if you ignored the 8 spider legs and the bulbous abdomen. "I knew you'd come back," she said. "They always do. The ones who care about others. They can't stay away." She touched down on the ground about 20 feet away from me, her human hands folded in front of her like a schoolteacher. "You've been busy," I said, gesturing at the web city around us. "I have so many children now," she said proudly. "And they're all safe. They'll never be hurt, never be sick, never grow old and die. They'll be my babies forever." "They're not your children," I said. "They're victims." Her face changed then, the sadness replaced by anger. "Don't you dare," she hissed. "Don't you dare tell me how to care for my children. I know what's best for them. I know how to keep them safe." She started moving toward me, her spider legs carrying her in that horrible gliding motion. "You lost your babies once," I said, backing away and unscrewing the cap on my poison sprayer. "Do you really think killing innocent people will bring them back?" "They're not dead," she screamed. "They're sleeping. They're waiting for Mama." She lunged at me then, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. I pulled the trigger on my sprayer and sent a stream of concentrated pesticide right into her face. The effect was immediate and horrible. She screamed, not with her soft woman's voice, but with a sound like tearing metal. The poison ate through her skin like acid, leaving smoking holes in her human torso. But she didn't stop. If anything, the pain made her more vicious. Her spider legs grabbed me and lifted me off the ground, pulling me toward those terrible human hands. "You hurt Mama," she said, her voice distorted by the damage to her throat. "Bad children hurt Mama." I managed to get the sprayer between us and emptied the entire tank into her face and chest. The chemicals dissolved her human features, revealing something underneath that was all spider, black chitin and clusters of eyes and mandibles dripping with venom. She dropped me and staggered backward, clawing at her ruined face. I rolled away and grabbed a flare from my emergency kit, popping it and throwing it into the web above us. The silk caught fire instantly, burning faster and hotter than gasoline. Within seconds, the entire web city was ablaze, and the bundles hanging from it began to burn too. The Spider Woman let out a wail that shook the trees, watching her precious collection go up in flames. Then she turned to me with pure hatred in her remaining eyes. "You killed my children," she whispered. "I set them free," I said. She came at me one last time, but the poison had done its work. Her movements were sluggish, uncoordinated. I managed to stay ahead of her until the flames reached the ground and began eating through her web supports. The whole structure came down like a burning house, tons of flaming silk and timber crashing to the forest floor. The Spider-Woman disappeared under the falling debris, her screams cut off in an instant. I stood there in the burning clearing, watching a century of murders go up in smoke, and tried not to think about all the people I'd been too late to save. The official report blamed the deaths on a rabid bear and an unusually aggressive pack of wolves. The families of the victims got closure, the forest got reopened to hikers, and life went back to normal. But I knew better. I'd seen something that night in the flames, just before the whole web structure collapsed. The Spider-Woman hadn't died. She'd burrowed down into the earth, wounded but not finished. And as I watched, I'd seen dozens of smaller spiders scurrying away from the fire, carrying something precious in their jaws. Egg sacs. Dr. Harrison helped me understand what the silk samples really meant. The protein structures were unlike anything in nature, suggesting genetic changes that couldn't have happened naturally. The Spider-Woman wasn't just a monster. She was something that had been deliberately created, altered by forces that science couldn't explain. And if it had happened once, it could happen again. I still work these woods, still patrol the trails and help lost hikers find their way home. But I carry different equipment now: industrial pesticides, flamethrowers, and a deep respect for the old stories that mountain folks tell about things that live in dark places. Sometimes on quiet nights when the forest is too still, I think I hear her voice calling from the deep woods. "Mama's coming," she whispers. "Mama will find you." Last month, we had reports of unusual web structures near the old mining roads in Tucker County. The webs were small, maybe the size of dinner plates, but they had that same impossible strength, that same unnatural shimmer. And yesterday, a hiker found what looked like a child's doll wrapped in silk and hanging from a tree branch. When we cut it open, it wasn't a doll at all. It was a squirrel, perfectly preserved, with 2 tiny puncture marks in its neck. The Spider-Woman's children are growing up, learning to hunt, getting ready to build webs of their own. And somewhere out there in the deep woods, their mama is healing, growing stronger, planning her return. I've requested a transfer to a desk job in Charleston. My supervisor thinks it's because of stress, because of what I saw in those burning webs. He's probably right, but the real reason is simpler than that. I've done my part, fought my fight, and barely survived to tell the tale. It's time for someone younger, someone braver, someone who doesn't wake up screaming about spider eyes and children's voices in the dark. The forest will find its next guardian, just like it always has. And when the Spider-Woman comes back, not if, but when, that guardian will be ready. Or at least I hope they will be. Because the mountains keep their secrets, and some of those secrets have very long memories. My name is Liz Carpenter, and I know what lives in the deep woods of West Virginia. I know, and I'm never going back. My name is Marcus Holbrook, but everyone calls me Mark. I've been a park ranger at Jefferson National Forest for 8 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Poachers, lost hikers, bear attacks, drug runners, you name it, I've dealt with it. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened in October of 1979. I guess I should tell you a bit about myself first. I'm 39 years old, spent my 20s in Vietnam doing things I'd rather forget. When I came back, I couldn't handle the noise and crowds of regular life. The forest felt like the only place that made sense anymore. Out here, the only sounds are wind through the trees and my own footsteps on the trail. It's peaceful, or at least it used to be. The Devil's Backbone is what locals call the limestone ridge that runs through the Mount Pleasant area. It got that name because of how the white rock juts up from the dark earth, looking like giant spine bones poking through skin. The whole area is steeped in Civil War history. Soldiers from both sides died fighting over these hills back in the 1860s. Sometimes hikers find old bullets or belt buckles, reminders that this peaceful forest was once a battlefield. October had been unusually foggy that year. Thick gray mist would roll in around sunset and wouldn't lift until well past sunrise. It made my job harder. Harder to spot poachers, harder to find lost campers, harder to see anything more than 20 feet away. The fog seemed to muffle sounds too, making the forest feel dead and empty. That's when the hunting accidents started. The first one happened on a Tuesday morning. I got the call around 8 a.m. 2 hunters found dead about 3 miles up the Devil's Backbone Trail. Sheriff's Department was already on scene when I arrived, but they needed me to help navigate the rough terrain and provide local ledge. What I found didn't make sense. Bob Martinez and Jim Creek, both experienced hunters from Lynchburg, were lying about 50 yards apart. Bob had been shot twice in the chest with Jim's rifle. Jim had apparently turned his own gun on himself afterward. The sheriff called it a hunting accident followed by suicide. Maybe Jim thought he'd killed his friend by mistake and couldn't live with the guilt. But I knew better. I'd seen enough violence in Vietnam to recognize the signs, and this wasn't right. The positioning was wrong. The blood patterns didn't match. And there was something else. Something that made my skin crawl. Someone had carved symbols into the bark of nearby trees. Strange, jagged marks that looked almost like letters, but in no language I recognized. The sheriff's men were so focused on the bodies they didn't even notice the carvings. When I pointed them out, they just shrugged and said kids must have made them. Kids. Right. Deep in the forest, miles from any road, in the exact spot where 2 men had killed each other. I took photos of the symbols with my camera, though I wasn't sure why. Something about them bothered me in a way I couldn't explain. They seemed familiar, like I'd seen them before but couldn't remember where. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the look on Jim Creek's face. I'd seen that expression before, on soldiers in Vietnam. The wide-eyed stare of a man who'd seen something that broke his mind. But what could have scared a veteran hunter so badly that he'd kill his best friend and then himself? I made coffee before dawn and sat on my porch, watching the fog creep through the trees like ghostly fingers. The forest was completely silent. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. It felt wrong, like the whole mountain was holding its breath. That's when I heard them. Footsteps. In the fog, slow and measured, like soldiers on patrol. But there was no one there. The second incident happened just 3 days later. This time, it was a father and son from Richmond, Dave and Tommy Patterson. They'd come up for a weekend hunting trip, something they'd been doing together for years. A passing hiker found their camp Friday evening, both tents shredded from the inside like wild animals had gone crazy. Dave Patterson was discovered hanging from a tree branch by his own belt. His 16-year-old son Tommy was found at the bottom of a ravine, beaten to death with a camping shovel. The shovel was still clutched in his father's hands when we cut him down. Must have gone crazy, the sheriff said, shaking his head. Mountain fever, maybe. Happens sometimes. Isolation gets to people. But I examined their camp more carefully this time. Found more of those strange symbols carved into trees, these ones deeper and more elaborate than before. I also noticed something the sheriff missed. Dave Patterson's rifle was completely clean, freshly oiled like he'd just finished maintaining it. Who takes time to clean their weapon in the middle of a psychotic break? That night, I decided to camp near the Patterson site. Called it an investigation, but really I just needed to know what was happening on my mountain. I set up my tent about 100 yards from where we'd found the bodies, close enough to observe but far enough away to avoid whatever had happened there. The fog rolled in thick around sunset, just like it had every night that week. I made a small fire and heated up some coffee, trying to act normal, even though every instinct I had was screaming danger. The forest stayed unnaturally quiet. No owls hooting, no branches creaking in the wind, nothing. Around midnight, my fire started acting strange. The flames kept flickering even though there was no wind, and twice they changed from orange to an odd greenish color. I'd never seen anything like it. That's when I heard the voices. At first, I thought it was just wind through the trees, but us. As I listened closer, I could make out words. Whispered conversations in the fog, too far away to understand, but close enough to know they were there. I grabbed my flashlight and searched the area around my camp, but the beam barely cut through the thick mist. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there?" The whispers stopped immediately. I stood there for a long time, listening, but heard nothing except my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Then, just as I was about to sit back down, a voice spoke clearly from somewhere behind me. "They made a deal, you know." I spun around, drawing my service revolver in one smooth motion, but there was nobody there, just fog and darkness. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from that old familiar feeling I remembered from Vietnam, the feeling of being hunted. "Who's there?" I shouted into the mist. No answer. I didn't sleep that night, just sat by my dying fire, weapon ready, waiting for sunrise. When the fog finally lifted around 8 a.m., I searched the entire area around my camp. Found footprints in the soft earth, boot prints that looked old-fashioned, like the kind Civil War soldiers might have worn. But that was impossible. Those battles had been fought over 100 years ago. I packed up camp and hiked back to the ranger station, my mind racing. 2 hunting parties, 4 dead men, all in the same general area of the Devil's Backbone. Strange symbols carved in trees, voices in the fog, boot prints from another century. I spent the rest of the morning in our small library, pulling out every book we had about local history. Most of it was standard stuff, pioneer settlements, logging operations, famous battles. But buried in a dusty old volume called Forgotten Battles of the Civil War, I found something that made my blood run cold. According to the book, a Confederate regiment had been stationed on the Devil's Backbone in October of 1863. They were cut off, outnumbered, and facing certain death or capture. The commanding officer, a colonel named Jeremiah Blackwood, had apparently become desperate enough to try unconventional methods. The book was vague about details, but it mentioned strange rituals and bargains made with dark forces. The regiment had suddenly gained an edge in battle, fighting with inhuman ferocity and seeming to know their enemy's every move. But their success was short-lived. Within a week, the entire unit had turned on each other in what the book called a frenzy of madness and violence. The final entry about Colonel Blackwood's regiment was chilling. No man survived to tell the tale of what transpired on that accursed ridge. Local residents report strange lights and sounds emanating from the battlefield even now, and most refuse to venture near the area after dark. I closed the book and stared out the window at the fog-shrouded mountains. 116 years later, and people were still dying on the Devil's Backbone. That afternoon, I made a decision that probably saved my life. I drove into Lynchburg and bought a small tape recorder and extra batteries. If I was going back out there, and I knew I had to, I was going to document everything, because something told me this was just the beginning. The third incident happened while I was preparing to return to the ridge. Jenny Morrison, a graduate student from UVA, had been conducting research on Civil War battlefields for her thesis. She'd been camping alone near the Devil's Backbone for 3 days when her professor called us. She'd missed 2 scheduled check-ins and wasn't answering her radio. I found her camp just after noon. The tent was still standing, her research notes scattered but readable, everything looking normal except for one thing. Jenny was nowhere to be found. Her notebook told the story. The first few days of entries were routine, measurements, photographs, soil samples, but the final entry, dated the night before, was different. Found something incredible. Today, carved stones arranged in a circle about a mile up the ridge. The symbols match descriptions from colonial accounts of devil worship among desperate soldiers. I can hear them chanting sometimes, especially after dark. Going to record tonight. This could make my whole career. I followed her trail up the ridge, my heart sinking with every step. The fog was starting to roll in early today, and I could feel that same wrongness in the air that I'd experienced before. My watch kept running slow, and twice my compass spun wildly before settling on completely different directions. I found the stone circle Jenny had written about and wished I hadn't. 13 flat rocks, each about 3 feet high, arranged in a perfect circle maybe 20 yards across. Every stone was covered in those same strange symbols I'd been seeing, but these were older, deeper, worn smooth by over a century of weather. In the center of the circle sat a larger stone that looked like an altar, and on that altar lay Jenny's tape recorder. I pressed play with trembling fingers. Jenny's voice came through clearly at first, describing the circle, reading the symbols out loud in some language that hurt to listen to. But as the recording continued, her voice changed, got deeper somehow, like she was speaking with someone else's throat. "They're here," she whispered, and I could hear footsteps in the background of the recording, heavy boots marching in formation. "Oh God, they're all here. Colonel Blackwood says they've been waiting, says the deal isn't finished, says they need more." The recording erupted in screaming. Not just Jenny's voice, but dozens of voices all screaming at once, and underneath it all, a sound like laughter. Cold, inhuman laughter that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then silence. I found Jenny's body at the bottom of the ridge, broken on the rocks like show. It'd thrown herself off the cliff, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what she'd carved into her own arms before she died. Those same symbols cut deep into her flesh like she was trying to write a message in her own blood. That night, I made camp right in the stone circle. I know how that sounds. Stupid, reckless. Exactly what the guy in horror movies does right before he dies. But I had to know. I had to understand what was happening on my mountain, what was killing people in my forest. And something told me the only way to get answers was to face it head on. I set up my tent outside the circle but kept my fire burning right in the center, next to that altar stone. As darkness fell and the fog thickened, I started the tape recorder and began documenting everything I saw and heard. October 15th, 1979, 9:30 p.m. Ranger Marcus Holbrook investigating supernatural disturbances on Devil's Backbone Ridge, currently positioned at Stone Circle, discovered by victim Jenny Morrison. That's when they started appearing. At first, just shapes in the fog, tall figures moving between the trees like they were on patrol. But as the night went on, they became clearer. Men in gray uniforms carrying old-fashioned rifles, their faces pale and gaunt like they hadn't eaten in weeks. They began forming up around the circle, taking positions like soldiers preparing for battle. I counted at least 30 of them, maybe more, disappearing and reappearing in the mist. None of them seemed to notice me at first. They were focused on something else, something in the center of the circle. That's when he appeared. Colonel Blackwood stepped out of the fog like he'd been waiting there all along. Tall, thin, with a neat beard and eyes that reflected my firelight like an animal's. His gray uniform was immaculate despite being over a century old, and when he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the mist. "You're the one who's been asking questions." I tried to answer but found I couldn't speak. My throat felt frozen, like the words were stuck somewhere between my brain and my mouth. "Do you know what it's like," he continued, walking slowly around the circle, "to watch your men die one by one? To know that everything you fought for, everything you believed in, is lost?" He stopped directly across from me, his dead eyes boring into mine. "We made a choice. When faced with certain defeat, we chose to bargain. The old powers promised us victory, promised us the strength to protect what we loved. All they asked in return was service." The ghostly soldiers around the circle began to laugh, that same cold sound from Jenny's recording. "But the old powers lied," Blackwood said. "Victory came with a price. We won the battle, but we lost ourselves. Turned into monsters, killed our own brothers, destroyed everything we meant to protect." He stepped into the circle, moving closer to my fire. "And now we're trapped, bound to this place, forced to serve until we can fulfill our contract. We need the living to finish what we started. We need bodies, minds, souls willing to complete the bargain." That's when I understood. The hunters, the student, they hadn't gone crazy. They'd been possessed. used as tools by these dead soldiers to continue some ancient war that should have ended over a century ago. "What do you want?" I managed to whisper. Colonel Blackwood smiled, and his teeth looked like broken glass in the firelight. "We want you to choose, Ranger. Join us willingly, and we'll make your death quick. Fight us, and we'll take you anyway, but slowly, painfully, making you watch as we use your body to kill everyone you've sworn to protect." Around the circle, his soldiers raised their rifles, all pointing at my heart. What's it going to be? I looked around the circle at 30 dead soldiers with their weapons trained on me, and did the only thing that made sense. I laughed. "You know what's funny?" I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "I've been here before. Different country, different war, same choice. Kill or be killed." Colonel Blackwood's smile faltered slightly. "In Vietnam," I continued, standing up slowly, "we had a saying. The only way out is through. You want to possess me? You want to use me to hurt innocent people? Well, come on then. But I'm not going down without a fight." I pulled out my service revolver and aimed it directly at Blackwood's chest. "And I'll tell you something else. I've had enough of ghosts. In the jungle, in my dreams, and now on my mountain. Time to put you to rest." The dead soldiers fired. The sound was incredible, 30 rifles going off at once in the confined space of the circle. But instead of the sharp crack of gunpowder, it sounded muffled, distant, like an echo of something that happened long ago. The bullets passed right through me. Blackwood looked genuinely surprised. "Impossible. The living can't resist us here. This is our domain." "Maybe," I said, keeping my gun trained on him. "But I've got something you don't." "And what's that?" "I chose to be here. You're trapped here. There's a difference." I don't know where the words came from. They just appeared in my head like someone else was speaking through me. But as I said them, I felt a strange warmth spreading through my chest, and my service weapon began to glow with the same greenish light I'd seen in the flames. "I've seen what you do to people," I continued. "The families you destroy, the innocent lives you take. You talk about protecting what you loved, but all you do now is kill. That's not service. That's evil." Colonel Blackwood stepped back, and for the first time, he looked uncertain. "You don't understand. We had no choice. Our families, our land, everything we fought for, is gone," I shouted. "Has been gone for over 100 years. You're not protecting anything anymore. You're just spreading death because you're too proud to admit you made the wrong choice." The ghostly soldiers around the circle began to waver, becoming less solid, their faces showing confusion instead of mindless hunger. "The war's over," I said more quietly. "It's been over for longer than most people alive can remember. You lost. The South lost. Your cause is dead, and so are you. It's time to let go." Some of the soldiers began lowering their weapons. I could see conflict in their faces, humanity struggling against whatever dark force had bound them to this place. But Blackwood wasn't giving up so easily. "You think you can banish us with words?" he snarled. And suddenly, he wasn't the dignified officer anymore, but something else, something with too many teeth and eyes like burning coals. "We are bound by blood and sacrifice. We cannot be dismissed by some simple-minded park ranger." He lunged at me, moving faster than anything human should be able to move. I fired 3 shots center mass, and this time they hit. The blessed bullets, blessed by what, I don't know, tore through his form like it was made of fog. He screamed, a sound like metal tearing, and fell to his knees in the center of the circle. "Impossible," he gasped. "The old powers. The bargain." "The bargain was broken the moment you turned on your own men," I said, standing over him. "Evil always destroys itself eventually. That's the only real truth about war." Around us, the other soldiers were fading away, their forms becoming transparent. Some looked relieved, like a great weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Others just looked tired, ready for a rest that was over a century overdue. "Thank you," one of them whispered as he disappeared. We've been trying to remember how to die. Colonel Blackwood made one last, desperate attempt to grab me, but his hand passed right through my leg. "This isn't over," he hissed as his form began to dissolve. "There are others, other places. The old powers have many servants." Then he was gone, and I was alone in Tuyaturdach. He circled with my dying fire. The fog began to lift for the first time in weeks. I spent the rest of the night in that circle, but it felt different now. Peaceful. The oppressive weight that had been crushing down on the whole mountain was gone, replaced by something lighter. Around dawn, birds began singing again, the first time I'd heard them in weeks. I hiked back to the ranger station as the sun came up, my mind still reeling from everything that had happened. How do you write a report about fighting ghosts? How do you explain to your supervisor that a century-old curse has been killing hunters on your mountain? The answer, I discovered, is that you don't. The official report blamed the deaths on a combination of factors: toxic mold spores causing hallucinations, isolated location leading to psychological stress, and simple tragic coincidence. The symbols carved in trees were attributed to teenagers playing pranks. Jenny Morrison's research notes disappeared from evidence, filed away in some bureaucratic black hole. But the deaths stopped. The fog lifted. The wildlife returned to the Devil's Backbone Ridge, and hunters started coming back without incident. I kept the tape recorder, though, kept the photos of the symbols, kept detailed notes about everything I'd experienced, locked away in a safety deposit box in Lynchburg. Because Colonel Blackwood's final words haunted me. There are others, other places. The old powers have many servants. 6 months later, I received a transfer request to Gettysburg National Military Park. Seemed they were having some unusual incidents on the battlefield there. Visitors reporting strange sights and sounds, equipment malfunctions, that sort of thing. The kind of problems they thought an experienced ranger might be able to handle. I accepted the transfer. Over the years, I've learned that the Civil War left more scars on this country than most people realize. Not just physical scars, but spiritual ones. Places where so much blood was spilled, so much hatred and desperation concentrated, sometimes leave. Opening. Weak spots where things that should stay buried can claw their way back to the surface. I've become something of a specialist in dealing with these problems. The Park Service doesn't advertise it. Hell, they barely acknowledge it even exists. But there's a small network of rangers who handle the unusual cases. We don't talk about it much, even among ourselves. We just quietly do our job, keeping the dead buried and the living safe. People ask me sometimes if I believe in ghosts. I tell them I believe in consequences. Every choice we make, every action we take, leaves a mark on the world. Most of the time, those marks fade with time. But sometimes, when the choice is dark enough, desperate enough, evil enough, it leaves a stain that won't wash clean. The Devil's Backbone is peaceful now. I still visit sometimes, hiking up to that stone circle to make sure it stays quiet. The symbols are still there, carved deep in the rock, but they feel cold and powerless now. Dead, like the men who carved them. But late at night, when I'm alone in my cabin at Gettysburg, I sometimes hear whispers in the wind. Not the same voices from the ridge, those are at rest now, but others. Different accents, different languages, but the same desperate hunger underneath. Because the truth is, war never really ends. It just moves to new battlefields, creates new ghosts, leaves new scars on the land and the people who survive it. And sometimes, those ghosts need a ranger to help them find their way home. My name is Marcus Holbrook, and this is my job. It's not the job I thought I'd have when I came back from Vietnam, but it's the one I've got. And as long as there are old battlefields and desperate spirits, as long as there are people who need protecting from the mistakes of the past, I'll keep doing it. Because in the end, someone has to stand guard between the living and the dead. Someone has to keep the peace. My name is Joshua Shepard, and I need to tell you what happened in the Cherokee National Forest during the summer of 1992. People need to know the truth, even if they won't believe it. I was 30 years old then, Been a park ranger for 7 years. Mostly handled visitor services and emergency response in the Big South Fork area. It's beautiful country, but isolated. When something goes wrong out there, you're 28 miles from the nearest hospital, and some of those mountain roads will shake your truck apart. I grew up Baptist, like most folks around those parts. Used to believe in God's plan, in prayer, in miracles. That changed 3 years before this story, when Sarah and little Matthew died in that car wreck on Highway 27. Drunk driver ran a red light. They said Matthew lived for 6 minutes after impact. 6 minutes of crying for his daddy, and I wasn't there. After that, I figured if God existed, he sure didn't care much about human affairs. Miracles were just coincidence. Prayer was talking to yourself. Faith was something for people who hadn't been kicked hard enough by life yet. The mountains didn't care about my problems, though. Visitors kept coming, getting lost, falling off cliffs, having heart attacks on the trails. I did my job, helped people, saved lives when I could, filled out the paperwork when I couldn't. That summer was particularly busy. Revival season brought all kinds of religious groups into the backcountry. Most were harmless. Families camping, church groups on retreat, maybe some snake-handling congregations from the deeper hollers. The mountains had always drawn people looking for God. Something about being up there, surrounded by all that green wilderness, made folks feel closer to heaven. Or so they thought. The first sign something was different came on a Tuesday morning in July. I was checking permits at the Honey Creek Trailhead when Mrs. Garrett from the visitor center radioed me. "Josh, you need to get over to campsite 12. Got some folks there claiming they witnessed miracles." I drove over expecting the usual. Someone thought they saw an angel in a cloud formation, or claimed their arthritis felt better after sleeping under the stars. What I found were 8 adults standing around a picnic table, all of them looking like they'd seen a ghost. "Ranger," called out a thin man in his 50s. "I'm Robert Mills. We need to report something." I pulled out my notebook. "What seems to be the problem?" "No problem," Mills said, his voice shaking. "Miracle. We witnessed a miracle last night." The story they told made no sense. They'd been part of a prayer meeting deeper in the woods. A traveling preacher they called Prophet Jeremiah had been leading services. During the meeting, a woman named Carol Peterson, paraplegic for 15 years, had stood up from her wheelchair and walked. "Walked where?" I asked. "Around the clearing," Mills said. 20-30 steps. Then she sat back down and couldn't move her legs again. I looked at the others. They all nodded. One woman was crying. "You folks been drinking?" I asked. "We're Pentecostal," Mills said, like that explained everything. "We don't drink. Ranger, I'm a retired doctor. I know what I saw." I took their information, told them I'd look into it. What else could I do? File a report about a miraculous healing? The superintendent would have me tested for drugs. But driving back to the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't what they'd said. It was how they'd said it. The fear in their eyes, like they'd seen something wonderful and terrible at the same time. That night, I drove out to the area they'd described. Deep woods, maybe 3 miles from the nearest road. I found the clearing easily enough. Fresh tire tracks, boot prints, signs of a large gathering. But there was something else. The animals were acting strange. In my 7 years as a ranger, I'd learned to read the forest. Animals tell you things. When they're quiet, there's a predator around. When they're agitated, there's been a disturbance. But this was different. The woods were too quiet, like everything living had just held its breath. I found a spot where someone had built a small fire. The ashes were still warm. Next to it, pressed into the soft earth, was the clear outline of a wheelchair tire. Standing there in the dark, listening to that unnatural silence, I felt something I hadn't felt since Sarah and Matthew died. I felt afraid. The next few days brought more reports. Campers talking about healing services. Backpackers who'd stumbled onto prayer meetings where impossible things happened. A man whose diabetes disappeared overnight. A child's broken arm that mended itself while people watched. I started keeping a file, unofficial of course, just notes and witness statements. The stories were consistent enough to be troubling. They all mentioned the same traveling preacher, tall, thin man with dark hair and pale eyes, voice that carried for miles, hands that glowed when he prayed. That last part bothered me most. I'd seen enough religious services to know the tricks. But glowing hands. Either these folks were coordinating an elaborate hoax, or something genuinely strange was happening in my forest. On Thursday evening, I got my first real look at Prophet Jeremiah. I'd been tracking the reports to their source, a semi-permanent camp about 6 miles up Butterfly Creek. Getting there meant hiking through some rough country, then following an old logging road that barely deserved the name. I parked my truck where the road ended and walked the last mile. The camp was bigger than I'd expected, maybe 40 tents and lean-tos scattered around a natural clearing. People of all ages, but something was off about them. They moved too slowly, like they were sleepwalking. When they talked, their voices were flat, emotionless. At the center of the clearing stood a man I knew had to be the prophet. He was maybe 6.5 feet tall, thin as a rail, wearing a simple black suit despite the July heat. His hair was dark and slicked back, his skin pale as paper. But his eyes were the palest blue I'd ever seen, almost white. Looking at him made my skin crawl. He was preaching to a crowd of maybe 60 people, but his voice wasn't loud. Somehow I could hear every word from 100 yards away. "The Lord has brought you to this place," he said, "because your faith is pure, because you believe in the power of prayer. Tonight, we will see that power made manifest." I should have turned around right then, should have radioed for backup, called in the state police, something. Instead, I found myself walking closer, drawn by that impossible voice. The prophet's sermon was standard fire and brimstone stuff at first, sin and salvation, heaven and hell. But as he talked, the crowd began to change. People started swaying, moaning, speaking in tongues. The temperature in the clearing seemed to drop 10 degrees. Then he called for the sick to come forward. A woman led her young son to the front. The boy couldn't have been more than 8, and he was clearly dying. Cancer, from the look of him. Bald head, sunken eyes, skin like tissue paper. His mother was crying as she knelt before the prophet. "Your faith has brought you here," the prophet said, placing his hands on the boy's head. "Let that faith make you whole." What happened next, I can't explain. The prophet's hands began to glow with a soft, white light. The boy convulsed once, then went still. For a moment, I thought he'd died. Then he opened his eyes. The change was instant and complete. Color flooded his face. His hair began growing back as we watched. He stood up, looked around, and started loud. "Ging! Mama," he said, "I feel good!" The crowd went wild. People were shouting, crying, falling to their knees. The prophet stood in the middle of it all, smiling like he'd just performed a card trick. But I was watching his eyes, and in those pale, pale blue eyes, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Hunger. I backed away from the clearing, my heart hammering. This wasn't healing. This was something else entirely, something wrong. I was almost to the tree line when the prophet turned and looked straight at me. "Ranger Shepherd," he called out, his voice carrying impossibly across the noise of the crowd. "Why don't you join us? You look like a man who's lost something precious." Every head in that clearing turned toward me. 60 pairs of eyes, all blank and staring. The prophet smiled, and I saw his teeth were too white, too sharp. "We have so much to offer," he said. "So much healing for a wounded heart." I ran. I ran through those dark woods like a scared rabbit, branches tearing at my clothes, roots trying to trip me. Behind me, I could hear laughter, not from the crowd, but from him. That awful, echoing laugh that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I made it to my truck, locked the doors, and drove back to town with the gas pedal on the floor. But I couldn't shake the feeling that pale-eyed prophet was still watching me, still smiling that terrible smile. That night, I called the state police, told them about an unauthorized gathering, possible health code violations, suspicious religious activity. They said they'd look into it. They never did. The reports kept coming in, But now they were different, darker. People weren't just talking about healings anymore. They were talking about resurrections. A man from Knoxville swore he'd seen the prophet bring a dead dog back to life. A teenager claimed her grandfather, dead for 3 days, had sat up during a prayer service and spoken to the family. Each story was more impossible than the last, but the witnesses were credible people. Teachers, mechanics, nurses, not the kind of folks who made things up. I started monitoring radio chatter from the camps. What I heard made my skin crawl. The prophet wasn't just healing people anymore. He was demanding things from them. Offerings. Sacrifices. Not money or possessions, but something else. Something the radio conversations called true devotion. I didn't know what that meant until I met Rebecca Coleman. She stumbled into the ranger station on a Tuesday morning, clothes torn, feet bloody, looking like she'd been walking for days. She was maybe 25 with tangled brown hair and the biggest brown eyes I'd ever seen, but those eyes were haunted, terrified. "Please," she said, collapsing into a chair. "You have to stop him, before more people die." I got her some water, let her catch her breath. Her story came out in pieces between sobs and shaking fits. She'd been part of the prophet's inner circle, one of his chosen faithful. For weeks, she'd witnessed miracle after miracle. The sick healed, the dead raised, the lame walking. It had been beautiful, she said, the most beautiful thing she'd ever experienced, until she realized what was really happening. "The healings don't last," she whispered. "A day, maybe 2, then the sickness comes back worse than before. But by then, people are so desperate for more healing, they'll do anything he asks." "What kind of things?" I asked. "At first, just money and jewelry. Then he wanted people to bring family members, children." Her voice broke. "Then he started asking for blood." She told me about the ritual she'd escaped from. A ceremony deep in the woods where the prophet had asked for the ultimate sacrifice, the life of a believer's child, offered freely to prove their faith. "A woman named Martha Hendricks," Rebecca said. "She brought her little girl, 8 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes. The prophet said the child would become an angel, would join God in heaven immediately." "What happened?" Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "Martha slit her own daughter's throat, right there in front of everyone. The prophet told her to, and she did it. She smiled while she did it." I felt sick. "We need to call the police, the FBI." "You don't understand," Rebecca said, grabbing my arm. "The little girl didn't stay dead. The prophet brought her back, but she was changed, wrong. Her eyes were like his now, pale and hungry. She wasn't human anymore." I wanted to dismiss it as trauma, hallucination, religious hysteria. But something in Rebecca's voice, something in her eyes, told me she was telling the truth. That afternoon, I drove out to the camp location Rebecca had described. It was empty now, but I found evidence of what had happened there. Burn marks in a perfect circle, animal bones arranged in strange patterns, and in the center of it all, a dark stain on the ground that looked suspiciously like dried blood. I was photographing the scene when I heard voices coming through the trees. 3 people walking toward the clearing, 2 adults and a child. As they got closer, my blood went cold. It was Martha Hendricks and her husband, walking hand in hand with their little daughter, the same daughter Rebecca had seen murdered. The child looked normal enough from a distance, blonde hair, blue dress, small hand holding her mother's. But as they passed within 20 feet of where I was hiding, she turned and looked straight at me. Her eyes were pale blue, hungry blue, prophet blue. She smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp for an 8-year-old, and waved at me with her free hand. Her parents never stopped walking, never looked around. They moved like sleepwalkers, following their dead but not dead daughter deeper into the woods. I waited until they were gone, then ran back to my truck. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely start the engine. That night, I called every law enforcement agency I could think of: FBI, state police, sheriff's department, even the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. I told them about murders, child abuse, cult activity, Anything I thought might get their attention. They all said the same thing. They'd look into it when they had time and resources available. Time was the one thing I knew we didn't have. The end came on a Saturday night in late July. I'd been tracking the Prophets group for 2 weeks, following their movement pattern through the forest. They were heading for the old Timber Ridge Church, an abandoned stone building that had been empty since the 1940s. Rebecca had warned me this was coming. The Prophet's Great Ascension, a ceremony where all his followers would be lifted up to heaven together. She begged me to stop it. "He's not a man," she kept saying. "Not human. You can't fight him like a normal person." I didn't believe her. Not entirely. But I loaded my service weapon with hollow points and carried a Bible Sarah had given me years ago. If this was spiritual warfare, I figured I'd better come armed for both possibilities. The old church sat in a valley between 2 ridgelines, surrounded by white oak and maple trees. I'd been there before. Sometimes teenagers used it for parties. It was a peaceful place, or had been. Tonight, it felt like hell had opened a door. There were maybe 200 people gathered in and around the church. Men, women, children, all dressed in white robes, all moving with that same sleepwalker shuffle I'd seen before. Candles and torches provided the only light, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. The Prophet stood at the altar, his arms raised, that impossible voice carrying to every corner of the valley. "Tonight," he called out, "we cast off the chains of flesh. Tonight, we leave behind this world of pain and sorrow. Tonight, we ascend to our rightful place at the right hand of power." The crowd responded with a low moan that made my skin crawl. It wasn't quite human, that sound. More like a whine through a graveyard. I positioned myself behind a fallen tree about 50 yards from the church. From there, I could see everything and hopefully stay hidden until I figured out what to do. What I saw next took away any doubt about what I was dealing with. The Prophet began to change. It started slowly. His skin grew paler, almost translucent. His dark hair lightened to silver, then white. His pale eyes began to glow with their own light. But it was his smile that gave away his true nature. His teeth lengthened and sharpened until they looked like a shark's mouth. This wasn't a man pretending to be divine. This was something else entirely. Something that had never been human. "My faithful ones," the thing that had called itself Prophet Jeremiah said, his voice now echoing from multiple directions at once. "You have given me your devotion, your worship, your very souls. Now receive your reward." He raised his hands, and the air around the church began to shimmer like heat waves. The people in white robes started convulsing, their bodies jerking and twisting. Some fell to the ground. Others remained standing but began to scream. They weren't ascending to heaven. They were dying, all of them. I could have run, should have run. Let this monster finish his work and gotten out of there alive. But I kept thinking about all those people, all those children, about Sarah and Matthew, and how I hadn't been there to save them either. This time, I was going to try. I stepped out from behind the fallen tree and walked toward the church, my gun drawn but not raised. The Bible was in my other hand. "Stop!" I called out. "Let them go." The Prophet thing turned toward me, still smiling that awful smile. The glowing eyes fixed on mine, and I felt my will start to crumble. This close, his power was overwhelming. I could feel it trying to burrow into my mind, to make me another sleepwalking follower. "Ranger Shepherd," he said, his voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere. "You've come to join us after all. How delightful." "I've come to stop you," I said, though my voice sounded weak even to me. "Stop me?" The thing laughed, and windows in the old church shattered. "I am eternal, mortal. I am power itself. I have fed on human faith for thousands of years. What could you possibly do to stop me?" Around us, his followers continued to die. Their life force was flowing into him like visible streams of light. He was growing stronger with every soul he consumed. I raised my gun and fired 6 shots center mass. The bullets passed right through him without effect. "Is that all?" he asked, still laughing. That's when I remembered what Rebecca had said and what I'd learned in all those Sunday school classes so many years ago. Faith wasn't about believing in miracles. Faith was about choosing to trust in something bigger than yourself, even when, especially when, everything seemed hopeless. I opened Sarah's Bible and began to read aloud. The 23rd Psalm, the first thing that came to mind. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The prophet Thing's laughter stopped. His glowing eyes narrowed. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. The streams of light flowing from the dying followers began to flicker and fade. He restoreth my soul. The prophet Thing let out a shriek that shattered every remaining window in the church. His form began to waver, becoming less solid. Stop, he commanded, his voice losing its supernatural echo. You don't understand what you're doing. But I did understand. For the first time in 3 years, I understood perfectly. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. The thing that had called itself Prophet Jeremiah began to dissolve, his stolen power flowing back to its rightful source. Around the church, people in white robes stopped convulsing and began to breathe normally. Thy robe, and thy staff, they comfort me. With a final inhuman scream, the false prophet vanished. The supernatural darkness that had hung over the valley lifted. The oppressive silence gave way to natural forest sounds, crickets, owls, the wind in the leaves. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I closed the Bible and holstered my gun. Around me, 200 people were waking up from a nightmare, confused and traumatized but alive. All but 12. 12 souls that had been too completely consumed to save. The official report blamed the whole thing on ergot poisoning, a fungus that grows on grain and causes hallucinations. Mass hysteria brought on by religious fervor and contaminated communion bread. The state investigators found no evidence of any prophet Jeremiah. According to them, the whole thing had been a shared delusion. I didn't argue. Who would believe the truth? Most of the survivors went home to try to rebuild their lives. Some couldn't handle what they'd experienced and ended up in psychiatric facilities. A few, like Rebecca Coleman, stayed in touch with me. We formed an unofficial support group for people who'd encountered things the official world wouldn't acknowledge. As for me, I kept my job as a park ranger, but I changed my focus. I became a chaplain for the Park Service, helping other rangers and visitors deal with spiritual crises. I also started studying theology and comparative religion, learning to distinguish between genuine faith and supernatural deception. It's been 30 years since that night at Timber Ridge Church. 30 years since I learned that there really are things in this world that feed on human belief, that twist our deepest spiritual needs into weapons against us. The mountains are still beautiful. People still come looking for God in the wilderness. Most of them find exactly what they're looking for: peace, renewal, a sense of connection to something larger than themselves. But sometimes, late at night when I'm patrolling the rims, areas, I hear voices carried on the wind. Preaching voices promising miracles and salvation to anyone willing to believe completely, to sacrifice everything for faith. When I hear those voices, I remember what I learned that summer. I remember that faith isn't about following charismatic leaders or witnessing supernatural spectacles. Real faith is quieter than that, more personal. It's about choosing to trust in goodness and mercy, even when the world seems full of predators. I still carry Sarah's Bible, still read it when the voices get too close. Because I learned something else that night at Timber Ridge. The darkness is real, but so is the light. And sometimes, if you're willing to stand up and speak truth into the darkness, the light is stronger. The Cherokee National Forest is still my beat, still my responsibility to protect. And I take that responsibility seriously because I know now what's really out there in those deep, dark woods. Predators that hunt not for flesh, but for souls. But they can be stopped. They can be fought. You just have to know what weapons really work and be willing to use them when it counts. My name is Joshua Shepherd, and this is what I learned about faith, fear, and the things that hunt in the spaces between them. Some stories are too important not to tell, even if nobody believes them. Especially then,